Hey, hey. Test 1, 2, 3, 4. Is that any better? Is that any better? Test 1, 2, 3, 4.
Do you need a wireless remote? You're just gonna click. Okay.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Test 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Hey, hey. 1, 2. Test 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. Test 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2.
I'm Karen Hurst. I have an 8-year-old son, Nico, with Angelman syndrome, and two 5-year-old twins who do not have Angelman syndrome. And we're really excited about today. So today in this room, here's what's happening. We got PT, we've got OT, we've got sensory, we've got literacy, we've got inclusion. It's gonna be great. So that's our plan for today. You can switch between the rooms. There's a 5-minute break between each of the sessions if you need to change out where you want to be for the other sessions happening next door. But we know that you want to be in here. So we're going to start in here. And we're going to get right into it because we don't have a huge amount of time, and I know you all want to get into the information and thinking about how this impacts your kid, what you can do to support your loved one with Angelman syndrome. So here we go. Our first speaker this morning is Amy Eapen. Amy is a physical therapist who has practice in New York, and she's been practicing for 15 years. She was here last year to talk about all the variety of PT options, no matter where you are, even if you're not in New York, how you can get some of this really amazing physical therapy. And she's back this year to dig in even more with us about what some of those different options look like. So if you've heard of the TheraSuit therapy, Amy does that at her clinic. So if you want to think about questions around that, that'd be cool. Or other kinds of intensive physical therapy to help support our kids developing their gross motor skills. That's what we're about to hear more about. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Amy Eapen.
Good morning. Can you guys hear me? Thank you all who came out this morning. Hopefully you get something out of this presentation. I just want to take an opportunity to thank everybody that sent videos for some video analysis. I wasn't able to use all of them, but they were all good in formulating some correlations between the kids at different stages, so I greatly appreciate that. So basically this presentation is just to go through the types of things that can come up, and then if you understand some compensations that may be existent, to combat them earlier. Okay. Let's see the clicker here. Okay, so first we're going to just go through a new walker type of positioning and movement. Some parents may observe a young child with certain gait patterns and they want to know what's normal. So first we're going to go through this model and relate typical gait to gait with Angelman syndrome. So first, with initial contact, a child will strike with their toe or their foot flat first, but the heel to toe pattern is a mature pattern, so you won't see that in new walkers. The base of support starts off as a wide base, and it will narrow to trunk level your legs once you start walking a little more. And the position of the upper extremities are always start in a high guard. They come down to a low guard before they become mature. So this is just an example. These are all normal, typical emerging gaits. So it could either strike initially with your toes, then or start initially with your foot flat, and then heel strike. Most people that started with the initial contact with the toes, 60% of them ended up changing to the foot flat and then became a heel strike, versus the people that started with the foot flat then went on to heel strike. So normally it takes about 11 months to go in a typical walker that has started before the age of 22 months of walking. Their base of support starts wide, but it takes about 11 months, so almost a full year for their base of support to narrow. So with independent ambulation, the children's arms are positioned with their shoulders in abduction, that means up like this, external rotation, and elbows in a high guard. It takes about 2 months typically to bring your hands lower, but your hands are still flexed in kind of a low guard. And then it will take 11 months about to start reciprocal arm swing. So that's after they start walking, another year about to get full arm swing. So now here, it doesn't really matter basically what age that you start walking, and I've noticed the kids with Angelman's who start walking, whether they're walking at 2, 13, whenever, they kind of start with the same typical gait pattern. So here is, let's do Quincy on the left. This is her walking with one hand, so she has initial contact with her toes, a wide base of support. The right arm is kind of like a high guard, so this is all typical of a new walker. And here's another little guy with wide base of support, high guard, but he's striking with his whole foot flat first. They're both typical of new walking. Here's just another example. So this is Quincy again. She was walking 4 months after that video that you just saw. So she's starting with her hands up. Her hand is in her mouth, and I'll explain that also. There's probably some reasoning why that she's putting her hand in her mouth to stabilize. But she does have a small gait pattern, wide base of support, high guard. Again, typical with new walking. Here's a girl who started walking at 13 years old, and she also is starting with high guard, wide base, foot flat. Her hands are a little bit closer together because she's holding something. So that is an intervention we might talk about after. So let's talk about common findings with Angelman syndrome. So some studies showed that these are the commonalities between the studies, that most kids with Angelman's have a ataxic or broad gait, 88% of them. 95% of them have a mouthing behavior, so that might not be a bad thing when a kid starts to walk. If they're mouthing a ring or have their hand in their mouth, it actually does engage your cervical stabilizers, so it might help them close 1 degree of freedom so they can walk. So it's okay, you don't have to take their hand out of their mouth or maybe give them something else if you don't want their hand, because it may help them to stabilize their walk. The short attention span is the reason, there is 92% of that, so that just means that if you're going to try walking, you have to do it in 1,000 different ways, or because they may not have the attention to do it one way. The visual problems I thought was interesting too. There's a high percentage of kids with visual problems, and we have 7 kids, I think, at our clinic that have Angelman syndrome, and most of them do almost like a foot braille. They try to feel out the surface with their foot instead of actually looking at the surface to step over. So that's something to keep in mind, that you may have to give them some visual attention to look where they're stepping. Another study showed that there was some connection between tone. The kids that have deletions, about 50% had normal tone, but 1/3 of them had high tone and 1/3 of them had low tone. The kids with the imprinting, most of them had normal tone, but there was a small percentage with high tone. And the kids with the mutation, most had normal tone, but there was about 1/4 that had low tone. But the star here is that almost 50% of all groups noticed that their baby was a floppy baby when they were younger. The thing about the research that they have out there, they have some research about ambulation and gait, but there's not much research about how they were when they were a baby. So I thought that was interesting. And now gathering everybody's videos, looking back on how they may have presented when they're a baby, there may have been things that you could just look out for, and if you notice, try to address. So let me just talk about tone really quick. So tone is basically what your muscle's readiness for action. So it refers to the sensitivity of the stretch receptors in the muscles. So most of the time, low tone is linked to hypermobility. So if your child has low tone, it's important just to know, because the muscles and the connective tissue support the joint, and if the connective tissue is very pliable and loose, and the muscles are weak, there's really nothing holding the joints really solid. Like, you need the muscles to be strong around the joints, so it kind of holds the capsules and the joints together. So you just may have more risk for joint issue in the future. Hypertonia is if they get very rigid. They're very sensitive to any stretch in the muscles. So here's an example in newborns, and from some of the pictures and videos that I've seen, it seems like the floppy baby may have been a little bit of low tone or hypermobile. So typically a baby, a full-term infant, would have some kind of, it almost looks like high tone. It's a little bit more tight and stiff, but their hands and feet are in flexion. Versus the low tone baby, it's kind of hard for them to lift up their hands and their feet, because weaker and requires more effort to lift up, reach for toys, and kick their legs. So this is how low tone, whoops, I don't know what I did here. Let me just pause for a second. So this is how low tone can affect, babies. So let's talk about sitting. So normally the evidence from the slide before showed that 50% of babies were floppy. So this low tone could be seen if the hips are widely abducted. So that means their hips are kind of falling apart. And but the problem with it falling apart is that it could lead to tightness in the outside of your hips. So if we just do a little test and we put our legs together and kind of, even if you're not squeezing your thighs, it kind of activates your inner thighs, which in turn will activate your trunk and your extensors. So this little boy here in this video, you can see that his trunk was a little bit more, his feet were out to the side and his trunk was a little bit more forward. This intervention that he did right here is a great way to kind of strengthen that. And he has a base of support now with the hip helpers, those little blue shorts he's wearing as a hip helper. They basically are like bike shorts that you cut and you just kind of sew the crotch together so you can't move your legs out that far, but it's a stretchy material that they still have enough freedom of movement. He's also sitting on a unstable surface like a rocker board, so that's really helping engage the glute muscles. The glute muscles seem to be a little bit weak, and when you squeeze your butt, it kind of straightens your lower back up. So that's a way that you can check. This little image on the left of the girl, it looks like a parent holding their knees together. That's a way that you could check for hip tightness. If you can try to put their knees, if it's hard for them to sit like that, if you push their knees together, they might try to cheat and bend their trunk forward. But if you notice that, they might be indications early on that there's some tightness and weakness in the hips. So now I'm just going to go to creeping and crawling. Hypermobile infants, and a lot of the videos that I've gotten here seem like kids that had a little bit more low tone because their hips are very wide apart. Again, because they get very wide, that there's a lot of tightness in the outside of the hip, so it makes it difficult for the thighs to come together to get into quadruped position for crawling. So there are a bunch of kids that kind of skip that stage or because they're tight. But if this is something you notice and if your child is at the crawling stage, the hip helpers or something to keep their hips under them would help them to get into a hands and knees position. We'll play some of these videos. It's also maybe noted this early on that some of the kids have more of a one side that's stronger. There's no research, unfortunately, about the stages of sitting and creeping. There's only research on the ambulation, so just looking back on the videos compared to some of the kids that we see now, we think there may have been a one-sided weakness, but no one ever thought it or heard it or said it. So if you do have a child that's crawling and you do notice they're propelling more with one than the other, then it's something to just keep in mind. I don't think it always works its way out. I think sometimes they need help to get it. Sometimes it does, and sometimes these kids go naturally into walking, but sometimes they kind of need a boost. So there's a question between like what's better, function or alignment. I think in this case, yes, of course, it's great that they're crawling. It's wonderful, but if you could try to combat both at the same time and get good alignment with the crawling, I would try to do both. Here is, whoops. So here is a little guy that we've seen. So he is crawling there, but I don't know if you saw that. Let's see if we can backwards it one time. He does have still a wide base of support. It's good that he's doing it reciprocally, and he is able to prop up on his arms, which is a little bit harder for some of the kids to actually get into full arm extension with the reciprocal kneeling. So this is still a good progression. But you could still notice, like, the reason I'm even bringing this up is that there is an 88% of kids that have a wide base of support. So maybe there is some correlation between the sitting, the wide base sitting, and the wide base crawling and creeping, that if we can kind of combat when they're younger, maybe it'll help with the walking later because they're building up the right muscles. Also with crawling and quadruped, if they don't get the weight bearing, I know a lot of kids skip crawling, but I really recommend it, especially for kids that have Angelman syndrome, because there seems to be a lot of issues around the hips and the wide base, which can lead to, complications when they get older. So the more weight bearing they do under their hips and knees, it's actually great because they're solidifying the hip joint and the muscles around the joint. And if there is any tone issues, when you get the muscles strong around the joint, then, it helps to kind of hold that joint there when they do move into walking. So let me just go through this research article showed a study of the gait pattern in kids with Angelman. So it seems to be the step length is how far one foot steps in front of the other, and that seems to be like a 2 to 4 year delay. It's probably because some of the kids walk later, so if they start walking at 4, maybe that's why it takes 4 years kind of to catch up, because typically it's going to take 11 months to narrow the base of support, another 11 months to get reciprocal arm swing anyway. So it's probably common to see their gait like a 6 to 9 year old around a typical 4 to 5 year old. The thing that I do think that was, again, a little concerning was the base of support, the stride width. So they're basically stepping wide. When they take, it's almost like a waddly step. And the step was 3 times as wide in a 6 to 9 year old compared to the typical 4 to 5 year old. So that's something why, a reason again why I'm reiterating to narrow the base of support as early as possible. The cadence and the speed, so it says that the cadence is slightly slower. So the reason that the cadence is slower at 6 to 9 versus a typical 4 to 5 year old is because it's kind of like an ataxic gait. An ataxic gait kind of means like they're stepping and there's pauses in between. So they walk, pause, step, pause. So it's not only smaller steps, smaller base of support, wider base of support, waddling, but then also the pauses in between. Did it change? Okay, so here is in all these videos, this is Quincy using a typical pre-gait walk for a new walker. They're all good, but there are some slightly increased base of support, slightly increased ataxic gait, and she has a shorter stride length. So I'm gonna just show you some videos of that. So this is her walking with shoes on and a stable surface. So you could see her taking the pauses in between. Let's see if I play that again. She has a high guard. It's all typical of new walking anyway, but the right foot does go out a little bit more than the left foot. Now with, this is barefoot on a hard surface. And I really think it's good to try, again, generalize the walking by doing it on various surfaces. So again, a wide base of support, hands up, the mouthing, which you could, again, be doing to try to stabilize, and toeing out, externally rotated. Just kidding. Oops. Can't find the mouse. Okay, this is her walking on a soft surface. So even though and this is bare feet, so this is probably the hardest it can get for her because now she has no shoes on and it's not a hard surface anymore, but still it does make her slow down. Oops, sorry. Okay, so it does kind of make her stop and slow down and stabilize herself before she gets to the next step. So she kind of has to put more weight into one foot before she steps through with another foot. So it's kind of good to try different surfaces when you start walking, because it'll engage those stabilizers that they need, and it's kind of forcing her to use the stabilizers for a more controlled walk. No. Okay, so here is another study. So it looks like a higher percentage of kids that had a non-deletion, 79% of them were ambulatory and reached it around 3.5. Kids with a deletion, they only reported that, well, 40%, so about half were walking, and if those half were walking, they usually reached it by 4 years old. It doesn't mean that more kids didn't walk or reach it later, it just didn't give me that number. But usually when they start walking, they don't stop walking. But some of them, very rarely, they do lose that ability, and we could talk about that later. It could be from various reasons, like a growth spurt or illness or something. They might have minor regression, but they have good muscle memory, so they can get it back. But what I did think was interesting is that about a quarter of each deletion and non-deletion, they all used a crouch gait. So that's something just to keep in mind now when, if your kids are young, or if they are not young and have developed it, you know, to prevent a crouch gait, some things that we could look for too. So let's just talk about what is a crouched gait. So a crouched gait is basically walking with your hips and knees in flexion and with your feet toeing out. And again, it's important to address because it's observed in a quarter of the kids that have Angelman's. It's mostly seen around 13 years, but it has a standard deviation of 4, which means it could happen 4 years after that, 4 years before that, but average is 13 years. And they don't think it's any association with genotype, with epilepsy, weight, height. There's nothing related to that. So the only thing I could think of is that, you know, there may have been some indications when they're younger that those muscles were weaker, which is okay. But now if you're aware of it, try to strengthen those muscles now. And if they have already gotten to this point, then let's address those muscles that are weak and see what we can do. If there's no structural changes, if their hips, if they don't have a scoliosis, a fixed scoliosis, if there's no subluxation or dislocation in the hips, there's no reason that it can't be improved by muscle strengthening. So I would always try that first before opting to surgeries. So let's again talk about this crouch gait. So the image on the top right, the normal gait pattern, if you just look at the right foot, I don't have a pointer, but the right foot is the one that's staying on the ground the whole time while the left foot goes through. So the top picture shows the right knee flexing and then actually gets into full extension when the front foot gets to the heel strike. Now in the crouched gait, if you look at the right foot is pretty much staying bent and flexed the entire time. It's actually not getting extension, and therefore you're not getting a heel strike on the other foot. Because stance time is more than 50% of your gait cycle, like when you stand on one leg through that gait cycle, it's important to look out for the way that they're stepping. This is just another study that showed the black line is basically where the kids with the crouched gait were versus there's a light gray line there where it should be. So the angle of the stance of knee flexion and hip flexion and internal rotation and anterior pelvic tilt is something I didn't talk about, but an anterior pelvic tilt is basically when you're crouched. I'll just show you real quick. But when your hips and knees are bent, it almost means like you have to stick out your stomach and your pelvis does tip a little bit forward because you have so much weight loaded over your knees. So that's where the anterior pelvic tilt may come in. And that's also an indication of your core ends up getting weak because you're not pulling your core muscles to get back, and maybe that's limited because you're so tight in your hip flexors now that you can't pull your core back. So that's something to keep aware of. Now, I just wanted to touch on this. I know I talked a lot about the crouch gait and the flat foot and all that, but there's some articles that show a connection with Angelman syndrome and idiopathic toe walking. Idiopathic just means for no rhyme and reason, like it's just random. There's nothing that's necessarily causing it, But this article does believe that there is a big sensory integration component that may be causing it. And we don't exactly know why. Like, is it because they're seeking the sensory input? Are they trying to stabilize somewhere? Like, are they stabilizing on their toe and forefoot because they're not getting full ankle range of motion? But basically in this study of all the kids that had some kind of developmental delay, and that's including everything on that list, every one of those kids had some kind of sensory integration. So developmental delay, how does that connect? So maybe because they're not getting the input through their feet since they're young, maybe because it takes them longer to walk, they're craving it, and they're craving it in other ways. Looking back on the videos of the crawling, if they're never crawling on their hands and knees or pushing off on their toes, they may not be getting that input, that solid weight bearing through their joints that they're craving, which means it could be why they could be going back to toe walking. So how do we bridge the gap and how do we intervene? I thought this was a cute picture. So don't worry, because I hope I'm not scaring anybody, but for every issue there's a solution. And my intention is not to scare anybody also, it's just to bring awareness, because if you are aware of the things to look for, it's easier to combat them, and you have a better intuition than any doctor, I believe, would. So here's all the things we talked about. The excessive hip flexion, knee flexion, wide base, externally rotated hips, shortened stride length, shortened stance time, hands in high guard, and the decreased joint input. So here's what we're going to do. So this is a question I always pose: do we teach the run before the walk? This is a theory that we personally follow in our clinic, that if you can teach a kid something beyond what they're ready for, it's getting them prepared in advance without using any compensation. So if a kid is not running yet, they may not even have built a compensation or muscles to stabilize. So you're kind of teaching them the right way. And the idea is that with neuroplasticity, it trickles down into some of the things of walking. So let me show, I don't know where my pointer is, sorry. So this little boy is not standing independently yet. This is a technique called Quervest medic exercises, where he does have Angelman's too. All the kids in this video have Angelman syndrome. And by holding him at his lowest joint, it's forcing him to engage his trunk, hip, and knee. So it's almost provoking an automatic response that if he could do it in the air, then he could more likely do it on a stable surface. So here is him trying it in another way on a wood board. Yeah, it looks crazy, but it really does help. You see his hands are already coming down, or one hand is coming down out of the high guard. It's almost like, all right, I got this. Yep, he wasn't leaning on him. And here is, whoops. No. Okay, this little boy is basically, I mean, because of the visual issues too, by walking over something with holes in it, it's very challenging. He just started walking, but walking and doing something more challenging is almost helping integrate all those reflexes in. Here's some ideas to increase stance time and improve the balance in ataxia. So these are basically boxes on wood planks. Like you could just, if you don't have a rocker board, there's ways to make rocker boards, and you just make a skinny plank and put a box on top of it. And again, it's forcing her to use the right muscles and engage that core, because they don't want to fall at the end of the day. It's almost like flight or fight response. If there's a way to catch their balance, then they most likely do. So by stepping over things, it's increasing the stance time of one leg. With Quincy, we use a lot of visual cues because she doesn't look where she's walking all the time. So it's making her aware that there's a surface there to step over. And she really does hold the weight well on one to lift the other. So that's helping with the stance time. And kicking. Kicking is a great way to increase stance time on one leg. So Chloe here has to put all the weight on her left foot in order to kick with the right. Right now, she does have weights at her ankles, these pulleys, and some grounding, so it's making it harder for her. But it's letting her learn the skill. Whoops. So activating the core and decreasing the high guard. The high guard will come down when the core is also activated. So, I mean, regular sit-ups, decline sit-ups. This is Naveen. He's using his arms too much to push through, and that's why we put an unstable surface under his arms. But he did great there. This is Quincy holding a bowl. So weighted stuff and bringing your hands together help to decrease that high guard and also activate your core. So if you could see her walking, she doesn't really have that lumbar lordosis where she's sticking her belly out. Her belly is tucked in, and then again, that makes the gait look better. And here's Naveen again. He's standing on two skinny planks. Again, it's forcing the base of support to come a little more narrow under him, and he's keeping his balance. We're joking that he's about to do a squat, and he's trying, so that's cute. Here are some ideas to improve hip extension. So backwards walking, if you don't have a treadmill, or if you do have a treadmill, you don't necessarily need bungees to hook them up. If you make like a PVC pipe that can come in front of them and like a little stand on the side, some people have done that where they can hold the PVC pipe and still go backwards on a treadmill. Or if you wanted to hold them up, the motion of the backwards walking is really good for the hip extension. These are all great ways to prevent a crouched gait and also to activate the muscles that aren't commonly seen active. Squats are another one. Oh, that's not squats. Okay, this is tall kneel walking. So kneeling is a kind of a hard thing to do because you have to kind of squeeze your butt. For the people that go to church, a lot of times when somebody's kneeling on the pew, after 2 seconds their butt comes down, and that's kind of a good example of it's very hard to squeeze your butts to hold it up just for that short period of time. So by strengthening that, the glutes will make the posture, the back, everything better. So tall kneel walking, adding weights, anything like that would really help to build up that. This is squats. Any type of squats would be good. Right now, Mason has a really good base of support here while he's doing squats. If they're very wide, you could put a TheraBand around their knees. Even doing it at the wall is a great idea. Every time he pushes back up, he's using his hip extension and knee extension. So this is, squats are great to do. Sit to stand from low surfaces, that really has to force your weight forward, and let's try that one again. If you have your feet on an unstable surface also, it really makes you, it kind of forces you to be extended. If your feet are on an unstable surface and you don't straighten up, you're gonna fall on your face. So it kind of is forcing them to stand up. So sit to stand from low surfaces and try with something unstable under their butt, like a disc under their butt or something under their feet. Okay, rotated hips. So I'm going to just show this example of Naveen. He's trying to do a hip extension. There's a big correlation between the rotation and the hip extension. So they kind of work hand in hand because the glutes are also part of your rotator muscles. So here's him. His foot is really in a bad, it's not in a great position. He's doing a wide, it's kind of like a wide leg kick down. So it's good just to observe that and know that, you know, that may be the typical compensation he's trying to use to get his hip out. He's trying to make his hip more wide. So then we notice it and we try to correct it, I mean. So now he's doing hip extensions against weights and his foot is in a much better alignment. And I mean, we have pulleys, but this is something you guys could do. It doesn't have to be with pulleys. If you have your child laying down flat and put a wrap weight around their ankle, and just do up and downs, like kicking down like a bowling pin or a bolster or a ball, it will work the same way. Sorry, I don't know what's happening. Here's another example of the sit to stand. The sit to stand is great for rotation because it's very hard to stand up from something with your knees knocking. So the knees kind of are forced to come out when you do a low surface sit to stand. And then, I don't know what's happening to the videos, guys, I'm sorry. This is basically like it's basically what's it called, an ACE wrap, a Fabrifoam wrap. So if a child is having too much rotation out, it's more efficient to walk with. It's not really that efficient to walk with your foot turned out. If your foot is so turned out, it means you're not using your hip and knee flexors. Once your foot is turned in more, you're stepping through with your hip and knee. So by using like an ACE wrap or something to wrap the foot into more neutral, it's a very subtle thing, but it helps to just give them that little bit of, corrected rotation. And that's a simple idea that you guys can do as well. Okay, to improve hip and knee flexion and extension. Let's see which one plays first. Okay, so this is sitting on a scooter board. This is also a great activity to do. This scooter board was too low for Naveen without the box, so we put the box in front of it. And you could do this with 2 feet, but a lot of times they are overpowering with 1 foot over the other. So if you notice that 1 foot is not getting a heel strike or pulling, this is a great way to strengthen your hamstrings. So that's an idea. Swinging is a great thing to try to do too. It's fun for the kids, but you're working on your knee flexion and extension here as well. She also has weights on her ankles, so she's strengthening. It's in the beginning they may not understand, but if you do it with them and swing, it's another way to get that hip and knee flexion. And riding a bike. So some of the videos that people sent, it looked like they had a very wide base of support even on the bicycling. So if you do notice that, now that you're aware of it, just use a band or something. It doesn't have to be so tight that the knees end up coming in together, but just something subtle to keep them in a better alignment, because they will. She's going real fast now because it's more efficient to bike when your knees are over your feet. It's very hard if you guys bike to know that, to push with your knees way out. So biking is a great exercise, but in this case, I would pick the alignment with the function. Here's some ways to narrow the base of support. So basically, we want to decrease the pathway. So here's a narrow pathway. So she has no choice but to keep her legs a little closer because there's no other way to get through. So just make little mazes or small spaces. That will help your child decrease your base. Here's another way, sit to stand and a narrow base of support. This is Quincy walking with the full TheraSuit on. So these are basically like straps, like the rotation strap I saw, but a way more complex version because it can mimic each muscle group. So this is, if you see the back of her feet, there's 1 foot almost connected to the opposite hip. So that's kind of bringing the base closer. So if you don't do intensive therapy or suit therapy, and you do notice that there is a wide base, you could try to put a belt on them and try to crisscross from their shoe to the opposite side of the hip, so it kind of brings their feet in, and it's elastic, so they still have space to move forward. And this is in the beginning when it's kind of the theory of teaching the child to run before you walk. So this is hard for her. And we have a little bit of loose support on her, so but she ends up getting it. She ends up feeling it. In the beginning, she doesn't know where her foot should go, and then she figures it out. So, where's my other video? Oh, I have a video here and it's not coming up. But it's basically a kid it was Quincy and she was wearing flippers. So flippers are a great way to increase the stride length. So it kind of forces you to lift up your feet. If you don't lift up your feet, you're going to trip over the top of the flippers. You know, it's just the ones you just buy like in the summertime for the kids to play with, so that's fine. Sometimes wearing big shoes, as long as the like long shoes, that kind of gives the same idea. Pushing something, this video is not working either, but pushing something that is fast will kind of force the increased stride length too. This is a barrel on a scooter board and it's moving fast, so Mason has to keep up with it and move his feet fast to keep up with that. Oh, maybe there it is. Here's another idea of putting spaces between boxes, so they have to take a bigger stride length because they can't get over to the next one unless they reach with a big stride length. And then also incorporating sensory integration. Oh, good. I'm glad the videos show, but these are just those tiles that you buy from the dollar store, and we just put stuff on top of them, different surfaces like rugs, squeegees, whatever. It really helps to get the input on your feet. And when Quincy was walking on her toes intermittently here and there, that was a great thing to help bring her back down. So that's a simple thing to do at home. A vibration board, I don't know if anyone has one, but that's also a great idea. Vibration really calms your muscles down, and kids with low tone, it kind of builds up the right muscles. So it really has a lot of benefits. If your child, though, does have seizures, just make sure that it's not vibration that triggers it. For most of the kids, it's not, that we have seen that have Angelman, so they all kind of benefit from using the vibration board. But if you do notice that it could be a trigger, just to keep that in mind. Sand and water is a great way, because sand kind of forces an increased stride length. It's weighted, the feeling on your feet. She ends up doing like a little run there. And her hands are in high guard because it is unstable and it's uneven. But the sand and water is a great tool for her, or for kids in general, to try to incorporate. If you don't live by a beach, just filling up those, what's it called, the bins that you put under your bed, those are great ones because they're kind of big enough that you could do it in your home. A little messy, but still nice. So many possibilities. So basically you prioritize what's first for you. Is it function or is it alignment? Try to start early. Any videos coming up? I have videos here, but they're not coming up. Just keep in mind that they might have regressions when they have illnesses, when they have growth spurts. What happens sometimes with the growth spurt is that the bones grow so much faster than the muscles can adapt to, and now they're using the muscles in a new range, which was kind of hard for them to use in the first place. So if they look like they're regressing, it might be a week or two, which is fine. Then they'll be like, okay, adjust to the new muscle length. But if you notice that it's prolonged time where they're not coming out of it, try to do something that they even did in the younger years to get past that point, because it's just like when a baby has a torticollis. This is you know, sometimes their head is kinked to one side, and then it comes out of it, and then when they start sitting, you'll notice it comes back, because they almost use that familiar pattern to stabilize because they don't know how to move, and then when they're crawling, same thing. Sorry, I don't know, that's my kiddos. I don't know what happened to the video, but same thing. When they're crawling, the torticollis might come back and then it comes out. So this is the same thing with kids with Angelman's. You might see the wide base of support coming back, the ataxia. They might want to crawl again or hold your hand. So as long as it's a short-term bout, it's okay. It's going to normally happen. It's just that if you notice that it's happening prolonged, then we have to go back to some of those basics. So some of those hip extensions, some of those knee flexion extension. It's not just about stretching. It has to be strengthening, because there is a lot of hypermobileness in the joints, and the stronger the muscles get around the joints, the less they're going to have complications later on. And you know, because we are you know, fortunate enough to learn a lot of new things now, it's good to see. But with the Angelman's research, there isn't a lot of research on the babies at the early stage. If there's some issues with the reflexes and the sitting and crawling, it just happens to be that, you know, thank God for all your videos, that we're able to see some same issues in crawling and sitting that they're having in walking. So it's kind of hopefully there will be some more research done to it, but I hope this helps a little bit. That's all.
Thank you so much, Amy. We have a couple minutes for switchover time. If you have questions for Amy, what's the best way to get questions to you?
I'll be at the table outside.
Okay, she'll be at the table outside. Come find her. We're going to take a short couple minutes. Like, if you need to use the bathroom, go ahead and do that. But we're going to get ready for our next presenter. So we're going to switch out devices so that she can get her materials up. And we're going to start in the next 3 minutes, hopefully.
Sorry, I literally went to time.
It's okay. feel like we're ready. We're going to shift gears now. And I want to introduce you to Kelly Bynes. I just made her a doctor. Congratulations. Yep. So we're shifting gears. We're going to move to talking about OT and sensory stuff for the next bit. And I don't know about you all, but I know that my kid has a lot of things that he's working on, skills he's trying to develop, tools, resources, and a lot of things that I'm trying to figure out as a parent about how to support his sensory needs, how to help him sort of figure out strategies and tools and sort of really get clear about what's working and not working for him. And so that's what I'm really excited about. Our next presenter, Kelly Bynes, is going to talk with us about how we do some of that thinking and understanding what's going on for our kids from a sensory perspective and how we can support their growth and development and what that means. So Kelly knows us through Martha and David, and is based in Frederick, Maryland, which is actually not far from where I live, but that's neither here nor there. And we're really excited to welcome her, and she has a private practice in OT, occupational therapy, in Maryland. And I'm going to turn it over to her so she can get going on talking about this. So Kelly Bynes.
Good morning. How many people have kids that have sensory issues? That's a lot of hands. How many people know somebody with sensory issues or have some yourself? Yeah, here and there. How many people have seen this face when they talk about sensory? Right? It's kind of confusing sometimes. And occasionally, you can talk to somebody who you think gets it. You're in the midst of a conversation, they're with you, you're describing some of the things that your child might do, and then all of a sudden you bring up sensory, and you see this face. What? Sensory? That's a thing? Well, it is. Even though some people go, right, sure it is. Sure, that's right. Well, it is, and it's based on science. And a little bit of background, the field of sensory integration and sensory processing began in the 70s with a woman named Jean Ayres. And she studied sensory issues in children who had learning disabilities. And so our field is pretty young when it comes to science and when it comes to medicine. And it's based on a lot of different fields of science. So I think that's where some of the confusion comes from. We integrate lots of different areas of the brain and the body. But I hope that today I can show you it's not rocket science. Sensory explains some of the very quirky, confusing things that people do, and it helps us understand what underlies behavior and function. I hope that today I can demystify some of those things, give you some strategies, and answer some of your questions. I would be remiss if I didn't thank these two people and Martha, Chandler's mom. I want to thank David and Martha for letting me share all of the images. I'm nervous now that I show Chandler. Letting me share the images that are here today and for letting me accompany you on your journey. Sensory is about the brain and the body. It's about how the brain and body work together. But it's also about how the brain and body work together within our environment to do everyday tasks. Virginia Spielman, the executive director of the STAR Institute in Denver, Colorado, and the STAR Institute, for those who don't know, is the leading research, treatment, and education center for sensory processing disorder. I direct everybody to their website. It's spdstar.org. They have tons of research information, tons of literature, lots of good information about what sensory processing disorder is. And she said, the term sensory processing describes the mechanisms of how you feel, and how you feel changes everything. She also said, the conscious experience of the competent self emerges from sensory motor development. The competent self. Isn't that what we want? Isn't that what we want for our kids? To be competent and to feel competent. And I want to highlight the role of sensory motor development in everyday function. If you look at this triangle of learning, you'll see that the central nervous system is on the very bottom. And I know yesterday there was a lot of talk about the nervous system at the cellular level, and a lot of the drug trials and gene therapies are impacting the cellular level. Sensory is just above that, because it's about our receptors, and it's about how our bodies receive information, make sense of that information, pun intended, and how we put that information to use. At the very top of this triangle, you'll see academic learning. And on the left, I've added that slide of progression of skills because I think it's really important for everybody who's interacting with a child to remember the demands of a task. If the demands of the task outweigh someone's capabilities, then the tower will crumble, right? Our senses down on the bottom, the sensory motor development, it's like a game of sensory Jenga. If there are pieces missing or if there are holes in that tower, then those demands can crush the tower, especially at times of new learning. Okay? This is another slide I'd like to share because to me it shows that relationship between brain, body, and behavior. And I'd like people to know that we all have and do sensory processing because we all have brains and bodies. And so sensory challenges, even though they are about neurology and neuroanatomy and how our brain and body works, it's a human condition. It's not just a neural condition. And I like this slide because I want to use it to remind you as parents that you are part of your child's sensory environment by nature of being there, by nature of interacting with them. And so that is a really important thing when we think about intervention. We can use ourselves, and it's what we try to do in every treatment session. Think about the sensory input that you give your children just by nature of interacting with them. So let's talk a little bit about what our senses really are, a little self-explanatory. And before we do that, I want to invite everybody to remove one of our strongest senses, and that's our vision. So I want you to sit there and close your eyes. And I can't really see because of this light in my eyes whether you're doing that or not, so I'm going to trust that you are. So I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to feel your body. I want you to feel where the chair hits you. I want you to feel your feet. I want you to feel where your hands are, where your arms are. I want you to notice the sound of my voice and any other sounds that might be surrounding us. And I want you to feel your temperature. I want you to notice if something is hard or soft, cold or hot. Okay, you can open your eyes. So just a quick little body scan to illustrate all of the senses that are happening all at once. And we used just our basic senses there. We didn't even get into the three lesser known senses of proprioception, vestibular, and a newer one that we talk more about now is interoception. So let's start with vestibular. It's in the middle. I put it in the middle because vestibular is one of our key senses that helps with everything else. Vestibular is about movement and balance. Most of us know that because most of us have felt off balance at one time or another. It originates in the inner ear. But what a lot of people don't know is that the vestibular sense also helps with self-regulation. And I was fascinated listening to Amy's presentation because when we look at muscle tone, when we look at postural stability, when we look at toe walking, all of those things are connected to the vestibular system. And so I want people to remember the dual role that vestibular plays in both self-regulation and motor skills. Proprioception is our joints and muscles. It tells you where you are in space, but it does that by communicating with vestibular and all of your other senses. And then interoception is about our organs and our internal sense of how our state is, our internal state. Are we hungry? What's our heart rate? Do we notice our breath? And as the field of mindfulness has increased for self-regulation, as we understand more from cognitive science and using things like cognitive behavioral therapy for anxiety, the issue of interoception has become bigger and bigger. We need an internal sense of ourselves in order to implement those kinds of strategies. And so I really want to highlight here how proprioception, vestibular, and interoception, even though we don't really pay attention to them, they're an inherent part of how we function. And so all of our senses work together, and this is not an accurate diagram, obviously, but I like it because all of the lines back and forth show how every sense works together. It's not a linear pathway, and it's not a direct line to figure out which sensory system isn't working. We can get patterns, we can get a general understanding, but this also shows with all of these lines, once we add those lines, we really start to develop an embodied sense of self. And it is our senses that give us that overall body awareness and that overall sense of competence for how we can function in the world. So I like this slide because it shows from a neurological level how our senses function. You can see the touch to the finger and the proprioceptive muscle, the proprioceptive sense from the muscle fibers, both of those pathways going through the spinal column, up through the brainstem, through the cerebellum, and to whatever areas need to be processed in the brain. The picture to the right is the actual cellular level. And I actually added this slide last night after listening to the presentations yesterday because I'm fascinated by, obviously, the impact, as I'm sure you are, of all of the gene therapies and all of the clinical trials we'll be seeing. And for me, it registers because it's my world coming together with that world. And all of the neurology that goes into understanding function, never before has the world of sensory and the world of genetics been so close. And it's really, I know you guys are excited, I'm very excited from an academic standpoint. So that's how sensory works in a nutshell. This is what we envision, or what is known as the nosology for sensory processing disorder. This is basically a graph that summarizes the current state of the research and the current terminology to describe sets of sensory challenges. So the first big thing that I like everybody to know is that sensory processing is not a medical diagnosis. Sensory processing disorder is not in the DSM. It's not necessarily controversial anymore like it was for many years, but it's just a framework for understanding which set of challenges somebody might have. And so under that umbrella term of sensory processing disorder, we can see sensory modulation disorder, sensory discrimination disorder on the other side, and the one in the middle is basically what we've been talking about a lot, is motor skills. And so that's sensory-based motor disorder. And then there's subcategories under each of those. One of the biggest researched areas of sensory processing disorder is the sensory modulation. And that's what we mean when we talk about hypersensitivity, hyposensitivity, and sensory craving. So sensory over-responding, a lot of people know that some people are sensitive to sounds, they're sensitive to how things feel, maybe sensitive to movement, maybe just get overwhelmed when there's too much input. And I thought about it yesterday when we were talking about when I was listening about the hyperexcitability. Is that a modulation disorder? It could be. And so I think it's really important when we think about Angelman to consider sensory modulation disorder. Sensory-based motor disorder, we see dyspraxia and we see motor coordination or postural disorders. And so it's not anything new, but these are different terms to describe what we've seen in kids that are struggling with developmental delays. Dyspraxia means poor motor planning, and it's a higher level skill than actual motor coordination. My analogy to understand dyspraxia is think of a basketball game and think of somebody who can do all of the skills you need to do in order to play basketball. So they can dribble, pass, shoot, run, probably a million other things I'm not thinking of, but If you can do all of those things, that's great. That's motor coordination. But if you can't take those skills and execute them in the context of a game and adjust your responses according to what's going on around you quickly, then you can't motor plan. You can't play basketball. And so I see a lot of kids struggle with motor planning, even though they have some pretty good motor coordination. And then sensory discrimination disorder is basically being able to distinguish between different sensations. And it's not done at a cognitive level necessarily, it's done inherently. And so things like hot and cold, being able to discern between tastes or textures, and even some of the sound. We know that a lot of kids on the spectrum struggle to adjust to tonal shifts of voice or prosody of speech. And that could be an auditory discrimination disorder. So all in all, in a nutshell, this is the current state of research, and these are the terms that we use to describe a sensory processing disorder. But what does the research tell us? One of the most recent and I think biggest impact studies, sets of studies that has been completed around sensory processing disorder was completed at the University of California, San Francisco, and these are the white matter brain studies. And what they have found is that children with SPD, specifically sensory modulation disorder, they have different white matter microstructures, specifically in the parietal lobe, which is responsible for a lot of somatosensory processing. And so these sets of studies are really key because what they do is show a possible biological basis for sensory processing disorder and show that it's possible to have an SPD separate from other existing diagnoses. We also know that there's a very big overlap between sensory processing disorder and ADHD. There's a 40% overlap. And so now when a parent calls me and says, well, we think it might be ADHD, we also think it might be sensory, how do we know? I can say, we don't. But it's probably both, because there's a high probability that it's both. But what this also shows is that in a lot of interventions, and I think it's this way with Angelman, in a lot of interventions we need a collaborative approach, because it's usually both. SPD and autism have a huge overlap. There's approximately 90% overlap between sensory issues and autism. And we know that in the general population, there's about 5 to 16% of kids that struggle with sensory challenges. So what do we know about SPD and Angelman? Unfortunately, not much. I would love to say that there are lists of studies to choose from so that we know which interventions to start with, but they just don't exist yet. And so what we do need to do is infer from other existing literature. When I went to search Angelman and sensory, and make sure I was on the right track, coming to talk with all of you, I found one study that it looked at sensory processing in Angelman. And what this study showed is that there was a wide variety of sensory processing patterns, no shock, but it did show that there was a dominant pattern of hypo-responsiveness in tactile and vestibular input. So what that means is under-responding to these types of input. And if you remember when I showed the arrows, the input, like processing, input, processing, and output, to me, this means that tactile and vestibular information is not registering accurately in the body. And what that means is we need to enhance that input for kids with Angelman. We need to give a broader amount of tactile and vestibular input. We also know from research that there is, from phenotype studies as well, that there's a big overlap between Angelman and autism. And because we know so much about sensory and autism, I am suggesting that we definitely need to take a look at sensory processing in Angelman. So we don't have conclusions, it's still confusing, we don't have answers, we do have more questions. And I think we can say that sensory relates to Angelman. Angelman has some sensory challenges, and I do have some ideas about where we can start with intervention, but we do need more information. And so what I've done and what I'd like to do for the duration of the rest of my talk is share where I think we can start and some ideas that I have that parents can implement at home. And I'm going to try and save some time for questions. So these are my suggestions about priorities for starting. And I chose these priorities because developmentally, these priorities will support all other areas of function. Stanley Greenspan, who has now passed, is a psychiatrist who developed the DIR floor time model. And it was like a light bulb early in my career when I listened to him speak. And he said a child needs to be self-regulated in order to engage. Once they engage, they can interact. And if you remember the triangle that I posted, at the very top is academic learning. And that is almost the pinnacle of interaction. That's output. That's how we measure whether a child is learning or not, right? Is through the output. How do they show us they know how to do something? And so we need to make sure to get them to that output level with execution that they're regulated. If they're not regulated, they won't be able to engage and they won't be able to interact in their world to learn and to show us what they know. So under self-regulation, I have sleeping, eating, and toileting. How many parents have struggled with one or all three of these issues, right? How do we not when we have children? And these are the three physical tasks of self-regulation: sleeping, eating, and toileting. When these things go awry, life is harder. We know that sleep issues are a part of Angelman syndrome. And so we can't ignore how to support sleep and how to improve sleep. And there's some sensory strategies we can try that we'll talk about. Attention and engagement. These are challenging for almost every child I work with, maintaining attention and then how to keep them engaged. And there's no one right answer, there's no easy answer, but we'll brainstorm a few. Positioning. This came up listening to Amy, alignment and function. We need to focus on position during every activity that our child does. It doesn't mean make their position perfect. It doesn't mean make sure they're aligned, because if our efforts to improve alignment interrupt function, there's no success, and the brain isn't going to want to do it again. So we need to support, like Amy said, support both alignment and function, and we can do that through positioning. And the three areas of positioning that I've chosen to target are tummy time, upright surface, and midline orientation. And I believe that these three apply across our lifespan. I believe in tummy time for everybody, not just infants. I think it's a really important stage and a really important experience, and I'll explain why. And then behavior, because, it's kids. Okay, pillars of intervention. So there are some key things that parents can do to focus on and try to duplicate that I think we try to incorporate into most sessions. The list of things that I think are key to remember are things like grading, joining, allowing failure, it's tough to remember sometimes, pacing, and silence. And so I just want to talk very briefly about those. When I say grading, I mean layering on or layering off a challenge. So when you're trying to teach your child a new skill, or when your child is inherently trying to learn something new, think about that challenge and know that because their nervous system is fluctuating, when there's sensory issues, nervous system tends to fluctuate more. And so on a day that it's hard, just because they've been able to do it before doesn't mean they'll be able to do it again. And so we need to become skilled at layering on and layering off the challenges in order to support success on a given day. And that will build over time. Joining means experiencing whatever emotion the child is having and validating the emotion that they have. This is generally an easier thing for parents to do, sometimes harder for therapists. You are so connected to your kids, but it's empathy. And Dan Siegel, who wrote The Whole Brain Child, has lots of videos on YouTube. I would encourage you to watch some of his stuff or read his book, because it's about connect and redirect. And when we connect with the emotion, we're actually accessing the limbic system in the brain, which allows the nervous system to calm. And I think that this is especially important for kids with Angelman because of that hyperexcitability. And we need to join them in their emotion so we can lead them towards a more regulated functional response when that hyperexcitability is getting in the way. And then allowing failure. Sometimes when we're working with kids who have special needs, and certainly parents of kids with special needs have said this to me, it's hard to let them fail because there's so much difficulty sometimes, right? It feels like that struggle is every day, and it is. And so how do we let them fail when that happens inherently? And I think it's important to let them fail in micro ways so that there's a feedback loop created in the brain from a sensory standpoint. During treatment sessions, I will let a child fall safely, very safe, I catch them, but let them fall so they can feel what that's like. In this picture of stacking the marble run, if Chandler dropped that top piece, then he would see what happened, right? If the whole thing fell over, he gets to see that it fell over. Now, we're not going to do that over and over again, and that's where we come to the grading of the task, right? But some failure is really important. And then finally, pacing and silence, slowing things down. This is especially important for children with multisensory processing problems because their brain can't keep up. We as grown-ups have had enough experience to know what's supposed to come next, so we jump to that. And we as grown-ups use our cognitive brains to try and teach. We want to explain and teach our kids what to do and use our words to tell them. But we need to slow down and let them figure out some of those steps for themselves. Again, it doesn't mean, being silent and not helping, but finding ways to slow down so that they can make their own neural connections. So let's talk about what to do, real strategies. This intervention priority is sleep, and we know why. Sleep changes everything, right? And without it, life is harder. I think we all know that. So some sleep considerations in Angelman. The first thing I encourage parents to do is measure a baseline. We all know when sleep is disrupted. But the other thing that happens when sleep gets disrupted is that things seem harder. Our perception is that today is going to be really hard because I didn't get any sleep. But we need to start measuring how much we're getting or they're getting, and we need to discern the difference between, is it a difficulty falling asleep, or is it a difficulty with night wakings, or is it both? Because the interventions for falling asleep look very different than interventions for night waking. There's overlap, of course, because it's all sleep. But I think it also helps parents maintain perspective, and it helps us know when we're making progress. I've had parents come into session, not just with sleep, but with any behavior, and I try to ask my parents to measure some of these things. But I had been working with one young girl for a long time, and I felt like she was improving on a lot of different measures. And the parent came in, and I said, "How was this week?" And she said, "It was awful. It was so awful." I said, "Well, what was awful?" And she said, "The meltdown on Wednesday. It took forever." And I said, "Well, how long did it take?" She said, "Well, probably at least 10 minutes. Right? And in my head, I was like, "Yay, only 10 minutes." Actually, I probably said that. Because when she started, she was having hour-long meltdowns every day. And as time goes on and kids progress, when you're with them every day, we lose sight of how far you've come sometimes with specific behaviors. And this is definitely the case with sleep. And so I encourage parents to measure that baseline. Limit screen use. I don't want to overdo discussion on screen use. I could do an entire lecture on screen time. Martha and David will let you know that I recently co-hosted an initiative within our community on screen time. And I think it's really important, specifically for kids with Angelman, because
Kids who struggle with sensory challenges and kids who struggle with motor skills often over-rely on their vision. And the visual system is one of the strongest systems of the body. And so even if it's not working accurately, even if vision is impaired, it's still one of the first line senses that we use in order to function. And there's more and more research coming out about the impact of screens on brain activation. And even when the body looks calm and restful, the brain is active. And there's also a difference between active screen time and passive. So all of these academic learning apps, right? They're scrolling, they're touching, they're doing things. It doesn't look like their bodies are super active, but their brains are. And scrolling and scanning and doing things on apps, that's all active screen time. And I believe, just based on the research I know about screens, that kids with Angelman are at higher risk for screen addictions, and they're also at risk for more susceptibility to the negative impacts of screen time. That's just me, there's no research on that, but based on what I know about screen time and now what I know about Angelman, I'm inferring that. For sleep, we need to build consistent routines and expectations. When things are predictable and familiar, the brain can rest and the nervous system calms. And we need to think about our cues to sleeping. Again, our physical environment gives us visual cues as well as other sensory cues, and so we want to be as calming and supportive as possible. And again, this means you as parents. What are you doing prior to the child going to sleep? We often think about what are they doing and what do we need them to do in that bedtime routine. But you as the parents are modeling self-calming, you're modeling calm down, and you're modeling organization. And so it's good to do lots of different sensory kinds of activities before bed, but it's also important to model what you want for your child. And so slow down for them. Don't go in and out of the bedroom. Don't play big play, hyperactive play, wrestling right in the bedroom right before sleep. You know, those are some examples. So here are some specific sleep strategies. I encourage people to put stuff in the bed. Do people have kids who sleep with all kinds of blankets and stuffed animals and all that stuff? Sometimes. So sometimes that happens, and the reason is because that gives more of that tactile input. Remember, some people may be lacking, kids with Angelman may be lacking that tactile sense. Remember the hypo-responsiveness, under-responsiveness of touch. So putting things around them, assuming that they're safe to move on their own in their bed, putting things around them will help them feel themselves in that space. For young infants, there are things like sleep hammocks, and then there are some things called, I put this one up there, I have not used it personally, but I think I want to, so if anybody tries it, please let me know how it goes. The Zen Sack, this is a new one recently, and it puts a little bit of tiny pressure right here, right near the heart. Ambient lighting and white noise are two kind of common sensory strategies that are pretty generic, but some things that we forget about. Ambient lighting is calming and soothing because it's not as bright. White lights, white Christmas lights, it might be a night light. There are all kinds of projectors that you can buy for the bedroom. I encourage you to play around with those kinds of things. We often assume that a dark space is going to be better, but it's not always better. So having some light, and for older kids, I encourage parents to give them a flashlight so that they can self-soothe themselves when they need it. Glider rockers, this is because with movement, linear and predictable is calming. So glider rockers are back and forth in a linear motion, right? Instead of like this. And so glider rockers might be soothing and calming, again, for any age. And then minimize social interaction when we want sleep. It can feel bad not to respond to our children when they want us at bedtime, and it can feel really bad if they're scared and if they're struggling in any way. But when you minimize that social and that verbal interaction, specifically for kids with Angelman, then that excitability is not going to be triggered, and this is really where you are a therapeutic tool for your children. Eating. Remember, sleeping, eating, and toileting. So eating is an everyday thing. How many times do we do it, right? 3, 4, 5, 6, if we count snacks, sometimes more, 7, 8, depending if we have an infant, it's like around the clock, right? So eating in typically developing children takes up to 4 years. And so when we think of a developmental delay, if eating has been disrupted from the start in some way because of poor oral motor skills, because of reflux, other medical things that come up, then the progression of those eating skills is going to be delayed as well. And often children with developmental delays take longer and more repetition to learn things. And so even when a child can eat, even when we think we know what they're doing, they are perfecting and refining that skill for another 4 years. And this slide shows all of the steps to eating. This is according to the SOS approach. This is the program I use when I work with kids and families on eating skills. And so you can see that all of these steps start with the tolerating, but it takes a long time to get to eating. And this is with every single food. And there are 5 or 6 steps within each of these steps. So there's like 25 or 30 steps to get to actually eating. And I want parents to realize this when you're presenting foods, when there's a struggle with eating, whether it's using utensils from a motor standpoint or tolerating textures from a sensory standpoint. The first step would be tolerating and interacting with that food in some way. And so how else do we support eating from a sensory standpoint? We want to think about that positioning and that alignment. We can put feet on a stool, find a proper sized chair, make sure that they're sitting upright at the table. No screens, my plug. And try means look, smell, touch, and taste. I want you to think about no longer does here, try this mean eat it, because we can't force a child to eat. Sleeping, eating, and toileting are the 3 things that need to be within a child's control. And no matter how hard we try, they're the 3 things that we as parents can't make them do, right? So we need them to learn it themselves. The golden rule of eating. Parents and kids have a role. It's a parent's job to decide what and when, and it's a child's job to decide if or how much. Okay? And things that you can encourage your child to do if they're upset about the foods in front of them is push it away, cover it up. You can make a try plate so that they can try, touch, taste, smell, see, just look at the food. Okay, that would be the first level. And then encourage napkins. In our feeding program, we go through more plates and napkins than I don't even want to look at in the budget. It's because teach them to spit it out. Teach them to cover it up with a napkin. Teach them to touch it with a napkin, because now they're engaging and they're interacting with that food instead of just throwing it away. If the challenge is overeating, as is sometimes the case when there's oral seeking or when there's just an overeating problem, we still want to use those steps to eating because we want the child to learn how to regulate themselves. So it's on them to decide if and how much they eat, and we can certainly get into that if you have specific questions. Next, toileting. So one of the biggest struggles that I've seen parents have when teaching potty training, and even in working with older children on toileting or toileting hygiene, is which approach to use. There's so much information out there that doesn't work for kids with developmental delays and kids with sensory challenges. And the 2 approaches that I encourage parents to think about are either the boot camp approach, which is do it all at once, right in a weekend, or what's called the structuring approach, which is gradually over time. The answer that I recommend for kids with Angelman is do both. And the reason for that is because a boot camp approach gives them lots of immediate feedback and lots of inherent practice within a short amount of time. But it's not going to be perfected because their brains and bodies are not working the same way. So then the faded practice happens over time. Toileting is a sensory and a motor activity. So we can just go through the senses and realize that. In the bathroom, there's sounds of flushing, there are blow dryers, there's running water, there's echoes. There's often fluorescent or bright lighting or mirrors. There are smells, enough said. I'm not talking about the smelly soap. In voiding and bathroom hygiene, they're both tactile experiences. We want to think about positioning, postural stability, and the interoceptive capacity that a child has. Can they actually tell when they need to go? If they can't tell, and even if they've shown you they can, if they can't tell consistently, then toilet training is going to be really difficult. And with bathroom, anything in the bathroom, it's a multi-stepped sequence. So from a motor planning and even a motor coordination standpoint, there are lots of smaller sub-skills that are required. So here are some suggestions. We want to use modeling and play with an emphasis on the sitting and an emphasis on the try. Try not to reward the success, but reward the attempt and reward the small pieces along the way. Time your trials in the bathroom about 15 to 20 minutes after they deliberately eat or drink. This will increase the likelihood of actual success on the toilet, which will provide that feedback loop that lots of kids need. For positioning, just like in eating, feet on a stool, use a floor potty. Some kids turn around to face the tank so that they can rest. If they're in a forward flexion or if they have low tone, then resting on the back of the tank can actually give them more success while they're using the toilet. Encourage cleanup for mastery. There's a technique called backwards chaining so that you have the child do the last step of a task so that they feel successful. And that works sometimes with toilet training or with toileting hygiene. Meeting the child at their level, and these are I just listed the stages because I think it's important to be realistic and to remember that consistency, that they may perfect it for a little while, regress, and then move forward again, that 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. So meet them where they're at in the process and don't get disheartened. If they could do it and then they regress, again, meet them where they're at. They may need more practice before they can generalize. They may have had independence and mastery, but then they may back up to get more practice. It depends on what the nervous system is doing, it depends on what the stressors are, and it depends on a lot of variables. Next priority, positioning. So this is a diagram from a colleague of mine. Her daughter drew this. Shelley Manel is a physical therapist up in Canada, and she has a program called Dynamic Core for Kids. And her basic tenet is that the diaphragm and the pelvis mirror each other and work in tandem. And the diaphragm and the breath that comes from the diaphragm working with the pelvis supports alignment. And so we want to think about breath and alignment when we're doing activities. And I've recommended tummy time, midline orientation, and an upright surface because these types of strategies get breath, alignment, and support function. So here's some examples. You can see Chandler on the platform swing here. This platform swing is not moving in this scenario, but the movement might facilitate more activation, but in a supported way when he's on his stomach. You can see he's not fully on his stomach there, but that's okay, and that's what I wanted to point out, because tummy time also for older kids means weight bearing. On the elbows, you get shoulder stability, you get postural extension, and you can see him on the scooter board there. Again, he's getting a little weight bearing on the forearms, and Amy talked about crawling and the importance of crawling. Kids who struggled with crawling early on need all of the tactile feedback on their hands to develop more skills later, fine motor. And you can see in both of these slides, visually, he's focused on what's right in front of him. So when we think about doing tasks standing up, there's a lot more visual. When we're down, looking at something right here, the vision focuses, and then we're getting more ocular motor control, we're getting divergence and convergence. There's a lot going on when we're doing something in prone on our tummies. Midline orientation. Here you can see Chandler on the bolster swing, And while, yes, he's working on balance and using right-left, you can see there's a whole lot more going on in this picture, right? Look how happy he is. And so doing high fives on that swing, he's crossing midline, or at least trying to achieve midline, which gets a lot of good activation. And again, visual motor. He's connecting the two together, which is going to be really important later for things like printing. And the other slide there, I'm working on, that was actually an activity where he would reach over, grab the ball, bring it here, and then pass it up here. And so there's head rotation, which gets that vestibular input. Remember, in Angelman, under responsiveness of vestibular, so we want to give head rotation or movement as much as we can. And then overhead, he's getting a lot of good proprioceptive input through his shoulders and his upper extremities. But he's doing it all while being midline oriented, which supports that more progression towards a more narrow base. Here's a little slide of Chandler and I. Beep, 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 beep. Beep, beep, beep. The horn on the bus goes beep, beep, beep. All through the town. Yay! Now what part should we do? The doors? The doors on the bus? Yeah? Okay, so like this. Okay, ready? Doors on the bus go open and shut, open and shut, open and shut. The doors on the bus go open and shut, all through the town. And he's done. Now, should we do the people on the bus go up and down? Should we go up and down? We're not done the song yet. Finish song, then all done. Simple. Okay, for the people, this is what we're gonna do. Ready? Ready? See? Stand all on the bus go. Uh-oh, we forgot our wheel. Look at Miss Nancy has one. So you hold this. People on the bus go up and down, up and down. People on the bus go up and down. Through the town. Yeah. Thank you. Upright surface. So upright surface, same as the other, promotes alignment, encourages core activation, builds upper extremity strength through flexion against gravity, and supports visual motor integration by placing the items at eye level, very much like the prior slides.
Dad.
This is Miss Nancy.
Oh, look at you painting. Okay, ready? Do you want to do another color? Should we do yellow? Okay.
Say yayo.
I put the red there.
Yayo.
Here we go. And dab, dab, dab. Your turn. Dab, dab, dab. Dab, dab, dab. You want to do yellow? You want to do red?
Easier to get to the upright surface.
You want to get some more paint? Can Miss Nancy do some? Yeah?
No, I'm good. You do it.
Should we get, we're going to make some orange. Are you ready to make orange? Watch this, Chandler.
Behavior. What do we want to think about with behavior? Specifically as related to Angelman, we want to think about the laughing and hyperexcitability, and does that impede function? We want to think about seeking behaviors because we see a lot of those, and you saw Chandler chewing on his jacket, but as Amy pointed out, it may be purposeful. Social engagement and capacity, but how much does that impede other skills? So we want to use it mindfully. And what is the level of distractibility and impulsivity? And so here are two key strategies and types of activities that can support attention and engagement, thus support behavior. And notice that I said support engagement and attention, not how do we address behavior. And I did that intentionally because sometimes the best way to address a behavior is not to address the behavior. We come in the back door. And so by providing sensory input, in this case, remember, tactile and vestibular, by providing enhanced amounts of the input a child needs, we might see less of the behavior that's impeding function. So some examples of providing tactile play: messy play, which is the bane of probably every parent's existence. I encourage putting things in the bathtub. Bathtubs are great places for messy tactile play. Play-Doh and cookie cutters, sandbox or water play with items to find under the bubbles. Arts and crafts, and for older age children, arts and crafts are always a good thing. Creating movement opportunities, climbing, running, jumping, outdoor play, playgrounds, hiking, biking. You get so much vestibular and proprioceptive input through these kinds of things. And then enhancing input through daily activities like loofah brush, burrito wraps with the towels after bath time, hugs and squeezes, wearing tighter fit clothing, buying heavier boots, specifically in the winter. That'll give lots of good feedback when a child is walking. And then minimizing visual distractions or aversions, and use of more structured strategies like peer modeling, picture schedules, shaping through faded hands-on support. And here's a little clip of this therapist, Miss Leslie, who worked with Chandler for a long time, addressing what looks like a behavior.
Green.
Oh, he said orange the other day.
Orange. Uh-oh. Here, you can put them in the bag. Oh, put them in.
So did you see that as soon as she told him what he could do and presented it in a way that made him successful at doing that, then the messing around stopped. It wasn't that he couldn't follow directions. It wasn't that he didn't want to or that he wasn't engaged with the task. He was engaged. He was doing his own thing with it. I am hypothesizing that it was too hard for him. And so he defaulted to what he could do. And you saw him drop one on the ground. That was cause and effect. So he's defaulting to a lower level response. And she didn't respond by saying, no, do this. She responded with, you can put them in the bag. So he's still engaged with whatever they're doing. And so this discussion of behavior loops back to basically remind us all that every behavior has meaning, and our senses are what help us produce behaviors. And so when we use a sensory lens to try and understand behavior, we start to see what that child's experience might be. And when we join them in that experience and structure it in a sensory supportive way, we get better function. And so I hope that you'll agree with me that sensory processing disorder is not the end of the world. It is the beginning of a whole new world. And I will add that it gives us access to our world. Thank you.
We have about 5 minutes for questions. So if folks have any questions, I'm not sure if we have mics or not. If we don't, then we'll have, we'll repeat the question so that folks who are live streaming or watching later can hear the question as well. I see one question right here. Go right ahead.
Our son has always hated shoes. Recently we had a snowfall, so we got him snow boots, which are pretty loose, easy to put on. Mm-hmm. I went to put them on. He started screaming like I've never seen him scream before, even though he's always worn shoes as hard as they are to put on. Mm-hmm. So I was taken aback and I had no idea what to do besides keep putting them on. And then the second his feet hit the ground and he could walk, perfectly fine. It was like nothing had happened, but it took a half an hour. Yeah. So what do we do in those situations?
So shoes and socks are one of the most common tactile questions that I get. And my first answer is deep pressure, squeezing. I mentioned squeezes and hugs throughout the day. If you put pressure and squeeze firmly, but you don't want to crush their foot, but squeezing on the skin activates deep pressure receptors that then provide some inhibition to the light touch receptors that are overfiring. So I would do squeezes and teach them to march once they're on, squeeze before and after, and see if that makes a difference. When kids have hypersensitivity, or when they've had it most of their life, they develop what's called a sensory affective response. So that's an emotion tied to that trigger. And so the more that you can do to be supportive emotionally, not rise during those situations, but add the physical as well, hopefully that response will shift.
Thank you.
Okay.
Super.
Right. I can't.
So I have, hi, I have two questions. Okay. So we don't do a lot of screen time, but we do use a talking device. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, you want water? Do you want juice? You choose. Mm-hmm. So the talking device is with us all the time to help with communication. Does that count as screen time that is bad? Because with an AS child, you kind of use it to communicate, and it's with us all the time to tell what he wants.
I would encourage you to think big picture and think about your overall day and what other types of screen time they're getting or not getting. Because we can't get away from using adaptive devices, and we can't get away, don't want to. I mean, technology is a benefit. So that's not bad, and technology, even active use of screens, is not bad. But it's overuse of screens, and this is the other reason that I do think some kids with special needs are at greater risk, because they are using devices to access communication, and that's good, but we want to balance it. And so I would be careful about the rest of the time and the types of screen time that you're presenting outside of using that device.
And one more question. Yeah. When should they potty train if they're not walking yet? Should you wait till they're walking, or should you attempt it?
Every child is different, and I think you have to follow their lead with readiness and remember those phases, engaging. Start with engaging. If they're not walking, but they have some interoceptive sense of their bladder and they know when they have to go and when it's full, then don't wait. Build on what they're giving you. But if they're not walking and they haven't yet shown any interest, then pushing with toileting you're not going to be successful anyway. Likely.
Okay. Hi. Our Angel is around 19, right here.
Hi.
I stand up so you can see me. Okay. So our Angel is around 19,
yes.
But at around age 13, he began to develop like sensory overload anytime that we would go out or have parties or invite people over to our house, to where he would become more excited, yell out, and even vomit in restaurants and any place like that.
Yeah.
Now we refuse to keep him at home, so we're going to take him out and expose him to the public and keep our life as typical as possible. So what do you suggest for dealing with that overloading of sensory in those situations?
Yeah, great question, and a question I get at every age. When somebody's sensory system is overwhelmed, the first line is removing the triggers, and I encourage parents to create a sensory break, go to a quieter space with dimmer lighting. And so removing sound and removing visual input can immediately start to calm the system. But I encourage parents to plan ahead so that the entire experience is going to be less overwhelming. And so I think it's having conversations if you're going to a family outing. I think it's selecting restaurants that are going to be a little more supportive. And I think it's having some things with you, even if it's taking a sensory break in the car or going to the bathroom if that's not an overstimulating place. But taking these intermittent breaks and planning ahead can preemptively give you guys the information and the support you need so you're not making decisions in the moment, but also then pacing it for him when you're out. And again, finding what does work for him when you're in different such situations and brainstorming how to get doses of that input when you're out and about.
I got it. We've done a lot of redirecting to where we take the iPad with us or something like that to shift his focus to something that makes him more comfortable.
Yep.
So that we can experience whatever the event is with the
Yes.
entire family. Does
Okay.
that make sense?
Yeah,
I don't know.
absolutely.
I don't know if that's good or bad, but that's.
So I think it's a double-edged sword. So it's not good or bad. I would encourage you to find other things that can be used as well as the iPad. And when you're using the iPad, use it with him so that there is a sharing and that joining, remember? Because what happens with the iPad when it becomes in teenagers, it's like their only thing often, right? But the iPad is put on a pedestal and they tune out other inputs. And for self-calming and self-regulation, we want them feeling their bodies. We want them grounded in their bodies so that they can calm without that. So do both. Yeah. Is that it? Thank you.
So our time is up with Kelly. I see you have a question here. So I think if you want to catch up with Kelly after, we need to do a swap out for our next presenter. We'll take a couple of minutes and then we're going to start with our next presenter on inclusion as soon as we get set up in a couple of minutes. So if you've got a question for Kelly, she's willing to hang up here and talk with you about that. So I'm going to ask folks here if you've got more stuff you want to talk with Kelly about to go outside. And thank you so much, Kelly, for your time and for your presentation. So for the next couple of hours, we are going to hear from Dr. Caroline Musselwhite, who, if you've not heard of her in our community, you are in for a real treat. Caroline is one of the people who has been involved in the Angelman community for many years, almost a decade at least, and has for many more decades before that been a leading speech-language pathologist, AAC person, and really helping to think about how do we support our kids around literacy, around communication, around fun, around inclusion in schools. And we are really lucky to get to hear from Caroline this morning about inclusion. And then after that, we'll take a mini break, and then we'll shift to hearing about literacy. So that's our plan for the rest of this time together. We know there's not break time really scheduled in here, so if you need to, you'll be a grown-up and take care of your own needs. And we're going to jump right in with Caroline and hear from her about inclusion, and then we'll shift to hearing about literacy. Here's the exciting thing. Caroline is not just a fantastic presenter, she also has giveaways. She also has really fun, engaging activities, and so stick with us, and we really are excited to welcome Caroline Musselwhite back to FAST and for this presentation.
Thank you. So you can see here is my contact information. I have a website, etc. But I just want to tell you something. So I turned 65 a few years ago, and I thought I need to rethink my life because I'm like traveling every week. I'm all over the world, and I thought I need a 15-year plan. So my 15-year plan, here's number 1 and number 2. Number 1 is I want to work more with individuals with Angelman, Pitt-Hopkins, and Rett syndromes. Why? Because I think the potential to actualization is amazing. I think that so many individuals who have Angelman syndrome are having a hard time showing what they know, and I want to help make that happen because I just feel like there's such enormous potential, and we're going to figure out ways to make students show what they know. The second one was that I'd like to support AAC and literacy camps, and so I've been a part of starting or helping move forward camps in Ontario and Alberta. And I live in Phoenix, so go figure. But anyway, I love being part of that. And then number 5 is not on this list, but I love doing stuff internationally. So if you know people who want international presentations, looking for Guatemala. Okay, so check with the working more. Now, in terms of working more, I'm just putting it out to the universe that I really want to find more students with Angelman to work with. And the universe found me, Kai, who lives 15 minutes from me in Phoenix. And so Kai was with us she goes to Out and About. We have a community outing event. If you want to know more about, guess what? There's a free download, a book on how to start a community for people who use communication devices in your community. And if you go to Teachers Pay Teachers, and it's a free download. Did I say free? Yes. So Teachers Pay Teachers, my name, download the free book called Out and About. And so here we are at an Out and About event, and Kai is performing a poem that she wrote. Okay, she had a little help. She's really new at having her communication system, but she's really, really learning. And this is a young woman that we are really going to be pushing for strong inclusion when she gets to school. So the month before, we took pictures, and then the student went home and, with their parents, helped write a list poem. So she found airplane and car, and she did I like, and they made a list poem about her adventures. And I just want to say that I feel like we have to have more opportunities for modeling. I'm not really talking about AAC today, but that's going to be a big part of my talk. This is my website, hundreds and hundreds of free tips. But I tried to make it easier because I have this huge belief that one of the things that helps us is smoothing your path. There's so many great ideas out there, iPad, There's so many great ideas out there, but it's really hard to find them. Sometimes we're always searching. So I made a Dropbox for you, and if you stay till the end of this session, you get a link to a free Dropbox with tons of goodies that I'm showing. And one of the things I've done is taken the tips I'm talking about and putting them in there so you don't have to search. So that's my website, and you can see that. I just saw this online recently. I love it. This is the gold standard. When someone is truly included, no one will question their presence, only their absence. I see so often IBO inclusion. You know what IBO means? In body only. There's no real attempt to fully include and have this individual be a really big part of the group. But this is what real inclusion means. Now, I'm going to be part cheerleader and part coach. More coach, because I want to not just say, inclusion's great, you need to make it happen. I want to talk about some of the strategies that can help. And I hope these are strategies, if your students are not fully included, they're still strategies that can kick up the activities within a self-contained special ed classroom. So what we need is the AA system always available. So these are just like, this is the necessary but not sufficient. This is to make it work, but it's, and then I'm going to teach you other strategies that will support even more. So AA system always available, yes, all day. Now, what I see happening is not that. Often it's like, let's use the device during circle time and pull out speech therapy. If your child had a profound hearing loss and needed to have sign, when would you want someone signing to them? Everybody understands that. I can ask people who know nothing about AAC, and I say, if you worked with a child who has a profound hearing loss and needs signing, when do you think we should be signing with them? And everybody says, well, all day long. And I think that's a paradigm shift. When we give that analogy to classrooms, they get it that we really do need to do it all day long. And so I get to work with individuals in their homes when you get a device from the state of Arizona. Still, so far, they're trying to cut stuff, but I'm hopeful. You get 12 hours of free training that comes with that. And I'm one of the 12-hour trainers, and I get to work with Kai doing her 12-hour training. And so I had told the family, you really need to model all the time. And all the time means all the time. All the time means, think about how she talked about we're going to have a lot of time sitting on the potty. And we're not just using the iPad for mindless activities. We're having conversations, and we're exploring, and we're having that rich joining, that rich interpersonal connection. Okay, thanks.
That's not working.
Sure. How about that? Yeah. So when we're doing that, we want to make sure that our students have that opportunity to have feedback. So Kai was sitting on the potty. I'm allowed to tell this story, by the way. And she was, had been there for a while, and she's just exploring her device. She's babbling with her communication device and hits the word me, and finds the word boss. She just happens to find the word boss. She's exploring. She doesn't know where to get back to it. And then she points to herself, and her mom models, yes, you are. And so the idea that all day means all day at school and at home. We need smart partners. We need people at school who know that system and can model. You need to stay ahead of that student and know it and take the time to learn it. It's not as hard as people think it is once they jump in and just start trying. We need peer supports. Peers are so powerful. They're great modelers, and for even more important, they're like great motivators and really good problem solvers. They figure out how to make things work that we sometimes have a hard time with. And engagement, we've got to have that engagement. Engagement helps us with focus, it helps reduce behaviors, and it also supports our friendships. So we need to do all of those things. One of the strategies I talk about is strive for 5. If it feels overwhelming to find all the language on your device, then strive for 5. And so what I'm talking about is 5 words to model for any particular activity in a school day. So think core. You only get 1 noun, okay? So this is not, we're not going to get stuck off in noun town. We want to have words you can use all day words. You might have heard people talk about core. So this is where AAC and classroom intersects, so that if you're doing an activity, you're thinking ahead to find 5 words you're going to model during this activity. 5 opportunities for that student to jump in. Open-ended questions, sentence starters, expectant pause. Now, I find that for students who have dyspraxia, and many of the students I work with do have dyspraxia, that when I ask a question, it's that deer in headlight. I am just making that dyspraxia so much worse if I ask a question. But if I do an I wonder, ooh, I wonder how he's feeling. Or, oh, I think she's feeling really. So if I do a sentence starter, I see students are able to jump in and make some kind of a response much more successfully. Strive for 5 also includes counting Mississippis, giving that pausing, slowing it down, not having such a fast pace. So I'm going to do, I really believe in the I do, we do, you do explicit teaching approach, and so we're going to try that. So I'm going to show my example first. So we're looking at a science experiment in the inclusive classroom, and I am not going to look up the word vinegar, and I'm not going to look up baking soda. Those are words you're, like, when's the last time you said baking soda, right? It's just not something you say that often. On the other hand, look. How often do we say the word look? So that's a word I want to model in this science experiment. I want to ask, so this is an emergent student, I'm just going to be modeling the words that are in bold and caps are the words I'm modeling on their communication system, whether it's high tech or light tech. What do we need? And then we're going through the materials. We've done the little chant. The scientific method is purpose, hypothesis, materials, procedure, results, conclusion. So as we're doing that little thing, every time we come to the next step, what do we need? What do we do? Those are the kinds of things we can be modeling. We're telling you to put it in, because most of our science experiments involve putting something in. And I don't care if it's baking soda or vinegar or lemon juice or whatever, we're putting something in. What do you see? Let's write that down. We want to take that data. So those are the kinds of things I could model for an emergent student, for a student who is beginning to use 1 and 2 words themselves. I'm going to be modeling a little more. Look at that. What do we need? Notice all these high-frequency words. Notice I don't have any outer fringe words. They're all these rich core words. Put it in. What do you see? Let's write that down. These are the kinds of things. How helpful is it to a student if they can learn to tell us, write that down when we're doing some type of an activity and they heard something they want us to document? So we need to be modeling that to help them learn to say it. So if you're thinking about watching some words or short phrases for reading or watching a video, so just talk to people at your table and think about what's something you would want to say, some high frequency things you would say when you're watching a video or reading a book. What are some things you might say? So just talk, and you can then raise your hand and call out if you want, or just have a conversation yourselves. So who has a word or a short phrase you'd like to share? You're watching a video or you're reading a book. What's something you might be saying? What's next, right? Or what now? Whatever words, whatever's easier to find on their device. What now or what next, okay? What else? Turn the page. And it might just be turn it, right? Those are higher frequency words. So just thinking about how can we always make it even simpler so we're modeling words that are all day words. Like it, I'm going to use more than page, so I might be saying turn it, or just turn please. So those are the kinds of things we're going to be doing. The tips for that aided language input, point to the keywords. Don't overdo. I see people who get excited about it having these honking long sentences. No, just make it simple. We typically stay ahead of that student by 1 to 2 words. So if they're using 0 words, we're using 1 to 2. If they're using 1 word responses, we're using 2 to 3. Got it, etc. So let's look at how we can support our students in inclusive classrooms doing vocabulary and concept support. So I'm working with a young man who's a high school student, and this is one of the things they gave him oy vey. I mean, I just looked at it and went, are you kidding me? Like, this is just not helpful. Here's the little PowerPoint. Okay, we made a black background with yellow text to help his vision, but there's just TMI. That's just way too much information. Oh my goodness. So Gail Van Tatenhove has taught us to do something called the descriptive teaching method. So instead of programming more like 50-cent words, use nickel words to explain those 50-cent words, okay? And that means our kids get it, right? We're take every new area of the curriculum, we're not trying to add in, photosynthesis and mitochondrion. When's the last time you said mitochondrion? Yeah, that would be never. I mean, like not since high school for me, except in presentations where I point out that I don't really know what, that I don't use that word. So we're going to use high-frequency reusable words to describe hard words, okay? And if we do that, then it means we really have to understand it to do that. So referential language is the usual way we do it. That's what we want to say, don't do that. We want to use descriptive language. So in referential language, it's unit-specific vocabulary with lots of new words like persecute and photosynthesis with quick one-word responses. Okay, what is the energy body for the cell? Mitochondrion. Yeah, that's just not helpful. That doesn't mean you really know it. You're not going to own it. You're not going to remember it. Well, we expect that correct or incorrect response. In descriptive language, on the other hand, we're just using plain, everyday words. We're using familiar words to describe new concepts, and we might have multi-word responses. We're not just calling out mitochondrion. We're coming up with descriptive words and more than one correct one. So before you're programming a new word on a communication device, ask these two questions. Number one, is this word for only a single unit of study, or is it used across multiple studies? If it's for a single word, a unit of study that's going to be over in a few weeks, that probably doesn't justify spending a lot of programming time. Will it be used after the unit's over? Are you going to say it again? Like, so for example, I have my high school student I'm working with at the School of Art and Design in New York is studying photography. So there's some words he's going to use over and over and over and over all 4 years. And so those words might be worth putting on his device. But we are certainly not putting Boer War on there because he's not going to use that later. So if the answer to these questions is no, we're not using it for multiple units, and we're not using it after the unit, have some kind of a light text support. So we want to be interactive, expect a response that's active, that's generative. Our students aren't going to be doing this. It's going to be plan B. We're going to be modeling. For years, I have a student I've worked with for years modeling this kind of strategy, and now she's starting to do it. So we were at an Out and About event. This is a young woman with Rett syndrome, and her dad was trying to find the word fish, and it wasn't under animals. And so she just laughed, and she said, swim down under animal. Right? She's telling him, you don't have to find it, Dad. I can just use the words to explain it. So we want to be doing talk alouds when we do this to show our students where we find those words like, okay, it's a describing word. I need to get more describing words. I want to say it's huge, right? So we're using describing words to model things. If it's a concept, we can't point at it. We want to go slowly. It's going to take time to learn it. We have a lot of open-ended questions because there's lots of right answers. And if they're peers, we really want them to help because they can benefit from this. So let me give you some examples. These are some that Erin Sheldon's daughter's peers came up with to help Maggie understand the ideas behind words from ancient Egypt. So we had pyramids, people build, very big, shape of a triangle, right? Those are words that are good words for her to learn. That's much more helpful than pyramid. Desert, very hot, very dry. It's a place. That's words that we want to be modeling. Those are words she can use on many, many different activities. I love mummies. Old, dry, dead people, right? Yeah, gotta love that. So these are just really fun things. I mean, I couldn't remember what a canopic jar was until I heard their definition. Body parts go in, right? we often do this type of thing just while we're doing a shared reading activity in an inclusive classroom. So this was a student I was reading Journey to the Center of the Earth, and here it is at the emergent level 2. We've taken Journey to the Center of the Earth and have it at 7 levels, and this is one of them. And so we are in a volcano. The volcano is going to erupt. So Mr. K was reading the part that says there's hot lava everywhere. And now he wants to talk about lava. He didn't pre-teach it before, but he realizes, gosh, they don't really know what that is. He's like, there's hot lava. Wow, look out. And Jake says, what? And Mr. K said, hot lava. Do not touch. So he's modeling, do not. And he points, so hot, red hot. And Ellie repeats, hot. And he says, right, Ellie, hot red lava. It goes down. It's in the volcano. So just using explanations and simple words while you're reading a book can be really powerful. And I've taught many, like students from 3rd grade and up can be very successful at doing this. I love doing 1-minute webs. I have a word I want to teach you. I'm going to just put it in the middle and have people come up with words. And I might show you a little video first so you've got that background knowledge. And then we're going to do this. And you can see the words that are underlined are the words that my students using communication devices said. So we have volcano, and one of them said it's orange, it's red. Somebody else used their speech to say it was a mountain. And I said, well, what about the lava? Tell me about the lava. And a student found hot on their device because we'd been talking about lava while we were reading other stuff and modeled the word hot for many different things, and then said, and it can go, and they said down, right? So just having this rich discussion with your students who do talk and students who don't, and just making it simple. Here's one where students are starting to write. We're talking about a monster in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and they're coming up with some ideas from from communication devices, and we're writing them on Post-its, and you could see one student was trying to write his idea, and that we'd been working a long time on actually using the alphabet, so that was exciting. So I want you to practice doing this. I have one for rainforest, so let's just call out 3 words that you would say for rainforest. What would be some words to describe the rainforest? Wet. Pardon? Green. Hot. Okay, trees. Right, exactly, perfect. I love using books for both input and output. So here's a book I made. Because so many students I work with have cortical visual impairment, I'm trying to think about some of the features that might be supportive. Like having a black background, but it's sort of a matte black, so it's not gonna go back to you. Now, I put this in the Dropbox I'm giving you, so you'll have this as a sample. You might be doing something way easier than volcanoes, and that's okay. I'm just showing you how we took a really tough concept and tried to simplify it, okay? So volcanoes, crater. C is for crater. Oh, you know what? The transitions are not working while I'm projecting. I had set it up with the box transition, so they're really bold transitions, and you see when it changes pages, and I don't know why it decided not to work. C is for crater. A crater can have water. A crater can have steam. Do you hear a predictable book coming on, right? A crater can have lava. A crater can be dry. And now a crater is a bowl-shaped hole at the top of a volcano. Erupt, another word you talk about. E is for erupt. Erupt means blow up. An active volcano can erupt. Lava. L is for lava. Lava is hot. Lava is melted rock. Lava can flow. Lava is melted rock coming from a volcano. The hot lava cools. It gets hard. It makes rocks. So let's look at this again. So I have a book, and I had a clean background, I had simple text, I had attention to color, so yellow behind the text to just call attention to the text. Most of the students I work with aren't reading it, but I want them to see the text. I want to do that print awareness. Bold transitions that for some reason went away, but so it would be very obvious that there's a new page coming in, so it wouldn't be, wouldn't just like, our students can sometimes miss that when the page changes. We want to make it obvious. Here's the concept plus an image for that concept. C is for crater. Here I'm connecting to the alphabet, but it's a very age-respectful alphabet book, okay? A crater can have water. A crater can have lava. So what do you see there? Right, I've got words that describe it, but I've also got that predictable text. And, you know, Brown Bear books are fabulous if you're under 8, but they're not cool if you're in double digits. So we can make alphabet books that have this type of thing. We could use the word it to support modeling. Instead of saying a crater can have water, I could have said it can have water, okay? And then which of these words would be on your device? So I'm going to call out a word, and you're going to say yes or no if your child or your student has access to this word. A, crater, probably, no, and don't put it on, okay? So you could just do it, okay? Can, have, water, okay? And then the same thing in the next one, we have a can have or it can have. And I don't care if lava's on there. It's not about lava, it's about understanding lava. But that's not a word they're likely to say as much as it and can and have are power all day words. Then the next thing I did was give a deeper connection to the word, a simplified definition coming, you know, that I made a definition that's got more information, but it's still pretty simple. So that's what we have there. Now, when I'm making alphabet books, I really like doing alphabet books to go with topics that your students are studying. I think it's just an incredibly empowering strategy. But I don't just start going, C, what's C? Oh my gosh, I can't think what's for C. What we do is brainstorming all the words that tell me about whatever the topic you're studying is. So if it's rainforest, we had those words wet and hot and trees and plants and snakes and, right? So we've got all those kinds of words. So when we're doing a rainforest ABC book, we're brainstorming first. Here's one I did with a group of adults with very significant disabilities at a day center. And so we talked about Earth Day because they had partnered with a kindergarten, and they're writing a book for the kindergarten, and the kindergarten was going to be talking about Earth Day. So we did an Earth Day one. So that we had things, we had places that are important with regard to the Earth, we had describing words, we had friends of the Earth, and I just made a visual map, and when people called out words on their devices, we would decide if they were connected to Earth Day or not, and if they were, where do they go? So just a great brainstorming activity to talk about all the things. I often do this toward the end of a unit, not at the very beginning, to see what they've learned about what we're studying. And it's fine, it's a great review, and you can leave out X letters. I mean, I don't care if there's an X in every one. Just, you know, hit the high spots. Don't go crazy, right? Have fun. I love using books as reports. So working with your student to co-construct a book that tells you about a topic. So when the other students are writing a paragraph or a page or whatever, a lot of times we'll do a book that's really engaging and fun. With visual supports, a talking software, some type of an app is a great way to do that, or PowerPad that I've added speech into. And what I love then is that book, if that book is on your student's iPad, their academic iPad, now they can listen to that book over and over and over, so we can have deeper learning about whatever it was we've been studying. So here's one I just love. This is one that Finn and Tina did, using Pictello. I often, if you don't have Pictello, Book Creator is a great app that's inexpensive, and as I said, I use PowerPoint a lot. But I'm actually going to show you this one. Hopefully, let's see, please, technology work. Okay. So I have, oh good, it's working. So I have my iPad here, and of course, all right. So here is Finn's book. They're studying missions. I believe it was 5th grade in California, Southern California, and they always study missions. And so he did one on Mission San Juan Bautista. So let's see if I can, I'll just hold the mic up so you can hear it. Okay. Nope. No, we want sound up. Sorry, I turned the sound off by mistake. Oh, come on. Okay. So Mission San Juan Bautista.
Mission San Juan Bautista.
Okay.
Mission San Juan Bautista was founded on June 24th, 1797.
Thank you, darling. Okay, so here's just the facts. Here's the factual part. And so he used a voice that is, a very clear, understandable voice. Let's go look at the next page.
That's old. Even older than Opa Abbey.
Okay? And he chose the voice, the old man voice, because he's talking about that's old, even older than Opa Abbey. So really powerful.
It was also known as the Mission of Music.
Okay, he chose a child's voice for that one. We want it to be real clear, make sure they understand it.
It was also known as Native American boys performed for many visitors.
My papa likes to play music, but not for visitors.
Okay, so think about, so he presented this to his peers. This was his presentation about this. So we have some of the features that made this really effective and really engaging. He had photos, real photos, both about San Juan Bautista and about the people that matter to him. He had text, and it highlighted the text so that we can be working on that print processing. He had speech. He used great voices, different voices. He chose what voices to use, and he had humor. And that made him want to read it over and over and over and over, so he's learning more. I love doing a photo response using augmentative communication devices, working with a literacy group on Fridays, and we'd been studying China, and afterwards I showed some of the features. We've been talking about the geography of China and different things, and so I talked about the Yangtze River, and one of the students came up with long using her device, and it's like, oh yes, like that's what we talked about. The Yangtze River's really long, so she got it. The beautiful was an opinion, and that's great too. The Yellow River, funny, and I said, are you telling me it looks funny? And the student laughed. Yes, it looks really funny, it's Yellow River. And somebody else said yellow. Somebody else said sad. Oh my gosh, that warmed my heart, because you know what we talked about? That the Yellow River there was lots of disease. It's flowing really slowly, and so it carries lots of bacteria, and people who lived along the Yellow River often got sick and died. So the Yellow River is a sad river. Yes, they're getting it, they're listening. The Great Wall of China, people go back. Oh my gosh, people go back. Well, it was built to keep out the Goths. Anyway, yeah, whatever. And it is going health to live. That's what one of my students wrote. If people don't come in and shoot you, it's really healthy and you just might live, right? So just wonderful. And I used Pic Collage to make that. And so I just took pictures and I copied them in here, but afterwards, then you can take each one of those pictures and just take a screenshot and make it into a book, so you can narrate it and talk about the Yangtze River. You said it was long, and you're absolutely right. That was a really long river in China. You said sad, and you're right, because so many students. We can give that so it's not a one-shot learning kind of thing. So adding that information, and so thinking about all kinds of different tools, but that's just one of the kinds of things I've used. Now, I want to talk now about participation scripts. So for our students who really aren't using are fully included or just included occasionally, and really need a lot of support, they're not using their communication devices robustly, but we're doing lots of modeling. So what can we also do to provide more participation and more connections and more of those social supports? And one of them that I do is a lot with social scripts. So the goal of the group is not using an AAC device. Students, by the time you're old enough to be included, they're not learning to talk, they're talking to learn. And so let's dance with the girl you brought, and let's see how we could help our students run activities. So I've done Can We Chat is a book that I did, and I have lots of samples of activities. But social scripts are interactions. It's things like joke telling or doing a life story or chit chat. It's beyond wants and needs. It's more more conversational, and it can support our students in claiming a turn and starting and maintaining a conversation. So taking turns, that turn taking is a really important thing that our students might be able to learn with this. So I'm looking here at some sequence scripts where we've pre-planned some steps, we've co-constructed by the user and a friend, a partner, and hopefully that's going to be a student in the classroom. And our goal here is social interaction, but also learning those rules of conversational turn-taking, okay, in a classroom situation. And these are some of the kinds of things that I particularly have found useful, step-by-step. So this is from AbleNet. TapSpeak Sequence is an app that you can get with lots of board maker symbols, and it's just an amazing app. Total Talk is an app. I've been helped with the development of it, and they've done a really good job with social scripts. And Pictello, a lot of you, raise your hands if you already have Pictello, because a lot of people have Pictello. And so it works really well for this as well. So let's just look at so it's multiple messages. We can have text and videos. Here's the goals of these social scripts, is to make communication more frequent, to make it feel motivating, to help students feel like it's worth the effort, that it's self-initiated. The student starts it, and then they can maintain that conversation. It's varied to keep the interest, different scripts for different purposes, multiple turns, so the students get to say more than one thing, range of partners, and especially about peers. Modeling different communicative functions or pragmatics, and easy. We should be able to just like set this up, do it really fast on the fly. So I just want to point out parallel teaching. I would never just do social scripts as a student. Never, ever, 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 ever. Never, like nada, not okay. If they're using social scripts, we must also be helping them learn to use a robust communication system with lots of language, and that involves more personal choice making, is more generative. This is especially for students who struggle with access, the students who have a really hard time accessing that 84 location device, for example, or just are learning the rules of engagement and the rules of social interaction. So, very important to remember, we want to separate out the motor task and the cognitive task. So we're not trying to figure out what we want to say and where is it and can I get to it on my device. We're just like working on that social thing. So let's think about line leader. If your students are in an inclusive environment, they're lining up, especially if they're younger, they're doing line-up kinds of activities. That is sponge time, man. We can sponge that up for a little bit of learning, and we can sneak in some literacy. So here are some line-up scripts that I've done, and so let's look at what has literacy. So if you're wearing red, line up now. Well, that's not really a literacy, but it's a good language concept of learning colors instead of doing some stupid put the red block in the can. Yeah, I've seen that way too many times. If your name starts with M, stand up now. So you guys have been sitting. If your name starts with M, stand up now. Anybody? All right, see? Little activity there, too. Okay, you can have a seat. If your name has, I'm actually going to do the next one through a social script. Let's do it through a script. Okay, class. Now, the ones that are underlined are the parts that my student came up with these parts of the script, okay? We co-constructed. They got to say whether they wanted to say, okay, class, or hey, guys, or yo, or listen up. You know, what fits their personality, okay? Okay, class, it's time to line up. So here's what's happening. I'm hitting this, and I'm saying these one at a time, okay? So I'm just going to record it real fast. Oops. Okay, class, it's time to line up. If your name has 3 beats, line up now. Okay, that's enough, so we'll just do that. So I'll let you, so you're the student. So she said, okay, I turned it up. So, okay, class.
It's time to line up. If your name has 3 beats, line up now.
Okay, if your name has 3 beats, stand up now. Let's do stand up. Okay, if you have a 3-beat name, I'm standing up Caroline. Okay. Okay, so, if your name has 2, and I didn't do the whole thing, but if your name has 2 beats, stand up now. Okay, sit. If your name has 1 beat, stand up now. There's so few 1-beat names anymore. Okay, sit. If your name has 4 beats, time to line up or stand up. 4-beat names, Angelica, Eliana. Oh, I can't tell you how many of my students these days have 4-beat names or 5-beat names. Wow, that's a lot of beats. Catch you later. Okay, so the student is leading this activity, and they're getting a chance to practice, and they're getting a chance to see who's standing up. I've even done it like, if your name has 3 beats, line up now, like Monica. So the students are figuring out. Letter awareness. Scavenger hunts are super fun. So here's a social script to support a scavenger hunt. Hi there, got a minute? Think about doing this with multiple partners. You get to practice the same thing with repetition, with variation, because you're talking to different friends. Hi there, got a minute? I'm making a letter book and need your help. Do you have anything that starts with the letter C? And the student would have picked what letter they want use. And this is a great way to link to your alternative pencil. So the student used, for example, this pencil, and they came up with the letter C. Okay, and now we've recorded it. Great, can I take a picture of it? Thanks so much. Got to talk to someone else now. So now we're going to make a book of all the things that started with the letter C. So we've got our social interaction, but we also have pictures for a book of things that start with C. And we're also going to do, the next day we're going to do things that start with M so that we can compare things that start with C and things that start with M, because we don't want this to be, today is brought to you by the letter C, because the brain is a pattern detector and needs to learn. So here's one we made in Pictello from Angelman Camp. Sadie has sandals with socks. Silly Sadie. So they went around and everybody found something that started with that letter, and then I made a little comment that goes with it, Silly Sadie, that also is alliterative. So we're hearing that sound of words that start with S. But the brain is a pattern detector. This is really important. We can't just do, this is S week. That is not good learning. That is not good instruction. We know better, we should do better. It can't be this week is all about the letter S, because we're not comparing it to anything. Wonderful story. I was talking about this one time about please stop doing letter of the week. And a teacher raised her hand. It's like, oh, Dr. Musso, I totally agree. She said, I did it for years, and then I realized it wasn't a good idea when I was doing this activity, and I held up the letter, and I said, what's this letter? And the blind child, so someone in the back of the classroom yelled out D, and she's all excited, and then she realized it's a kid who's totally blind. He just knows it's D week, right? The answer to every question this week is D. Right? Or duh. You know, no, I wanted the sound, duh. So we've got to have that pattern detection. Is it D or is it N? So we have Nico has nifty New Balance. Nice, Nico. So this is Nico when he was not quite 3. It's been a while. Alphabet Action Man is a fabulous game to play. Okay, I just want to see if you guys were watching. Okay, just testing. Well done. Okay, we had an Angelman camp about 5 years ago in Ontario. We got the grant for it about 10 days before camp started. We found out we were doing camp. Oh my gosh, we were just scrambling. I was in Spain, and Gretchen was in Portugal, and Erin was in Ontario, and we're trying to plan this camp. And by the time we got there, it wasn't completely pulled together. Full disclosure, right? Imagine that. And so Gretchen and Erin said, Caroline, can you take all the families and all the students with Angelman? 17, just saying, 17. And, you know, just do something with them for 2 hours? And I said, no. And they said, yeah, you don't have a choice. And so we found out that you can do Alphabet Action Man for quite a while. It's really fun. They stayed really engaged. So here, Hannah, somebody has pointed out the letter H for Hannah, and then we said, oh, what would be something we could do for Hannah? What starts with the letter H? And then we came up with hopping. We're gonna, you know, so I had 2 Post-its. We're gonna hop, hop, hop for H. And so everybody's hopping, and we're showing the letter. And people are trying to find the letter on their alternative pencils or on their communication device. And then they're trying to find what's another word that starts with H. And so they're looking on the communication device, and they're just modeling. It wasn't like the students are finding that, oh, yes, I could do hug. Hug starts with H. But we can find the word hug on a communication device, and then we're like, what's hug, hug? And so everybody's going around hugging someone different. And then we picked another letter, and so now we're coming up with the J. Let's jump for J, let's, et cetera. So just lots of fun ways to do alphabet, to play a game. We're increasing those communication opportunities, but here's the script so you could do it in the inclusive classroom, okay? So think about that. That was such a fantastic presentation by the OT just before this. And one of the things she talked about was that, having some appropriate movement in a safe place can really help, with our sensory self-regulation. And so Alphabet Action Man is a wonderful thing. So the first letter's D. Danielle picked the word dance, so the student is using their communication device, and they're hitting repeated switches. And so let me show you how that might look. I think I've got, let's see if I have this on tap speak sequence. I can't remember what I've got programmed. Thank you, Vanna. Okay. Well, here's the letter hunt on tap speak sequence. Let me go put that so you can see it. Oh, good. So I'm on this one. So I'll let you have this. So I hit the first one.
Hey, I'm doing a letter hunt.
Let me turn it so it's okay.
I'm looking for stuff that starts with the letter M. Can you find something to help me? You can take a picture of it, or you can put it in my box. Thanks a ton. See you around.
Did you notice that I had green for the first one and red for the last? That means it's starting with green and it's ending with red. Let me show you another one in Total Talk. So I had 3 Total Talk subscriptions, apps, free codes for the silent auction, but they didn't get here in time. Darn, instead of doing the silent auction, I'm gonna have to give away 3 Total Talk. So let's go open up Total Talk, and I'll show you how it works on that. There you go. So I'm on Total Talk, and I could either be, I could have my core vocabulary, or I could go to my photos and have lots of photos. So I love. So I could have an I love food. I could go to the next one.
I love food when it's beautifully arranged.
This was done by an adult.
I love food that's colorful and healthy.
But see all the little pictures. But the other thing we could do is great joke page. And I'm having iPad problems. This is not Total Talk problems. This is, I think I need to reset my iPad. Anyway, so I'm going to go to my stories. And I'm going to find the story of the line up to the beats.
Line up to the beats.
And so I could either touch these in order, or I could hit next phrase.
Okay, everybody listen. Time to line up. I'll give clues. If your name has 3 beats, line up now. Okay, let's check. Like this, mon, I, ka. Next, if your name has 1 beat, line up now. Like this, Jack.
Okay, so that's just an example of how we could set up scores of social scripts, and that really, really fast. So that's Total Talk, and if you want to win it, here's how you could win it. You're going to write down in 50 words or less why, this is only for parents, okay, why your student, your child or adult, why this would be something that you think they would really, really benefit from, and you're going to give it to me when my session's over at 12:45, and I will pick 3 and give you the code so you can win it. So here's just how we could set up Alphabet Action Man. There's a tip for that, and I put it in your Dropbox, okay? I love sharing. When students have done something, a poem, a story, an art thing, some kind of a craft, whatever they've done, having them help us have language to tell us about it is a really fun thing. So here's one. that we did at a high school for students who were have very significant disabilities. They all have significant cortical visual impairment. So this is what we did. One student did with us. So she decided she wanted yo as an attention getter, and she's doing this. Think about the high school students that she met with to say, hey, I'm making a book. It's an alphabet book. It's for kindergartners. Now, do you get it, the difference? She's a high school student who doesn't know the alphabet. But that's, that might be embarrassing for her to say, I'm trying to learn about the letter C. So instead, we flipped the script and she said, I'm making an alphabet book. It's for kindergartners. And now she's the helper of kindergartners. So now she's going to go back, and everybody that she interviewed who took a picture of something that started with the letter C or the letter M, now she's going to show them the book that she made. So she's following up. So there's that second opportunity to have this social interaction, right? So we have an attention getter, yo. We have a starter, I have something to tell you. It's the alphabet book for the kindergarten. Want to see? And then have it, and they look at it. What do you think? Isn't it cool? Thanks, I'm outie. That's what the student picked. Some of her peers gave ways to modeled possible closings, and I would never have known to say I'm outie. Raise your hands if you did not know that this is a current way to say goodbye in high schools, right? I'm outie. Is that new to anybody or just me? Anyway, so just really powerful having those peers involved to get that language that will, have other students really be engaged and interested. So it's like my good friend Thomas Edison said about creativity when I said, Tom, how do you do it? How are you so creative? You just have so many amazing things you've invented. He said, Caroline, I'll tell you. The way to have a good idea is to have a lot of them. So I have given you a lot of ideas. I don't expect you to do every one. I expect you to take one and grow it and customize it and make it fit your needs and the needs of your student. And just a little subliminal messaging here. AAC in the Desert is a conference I run in Phoenix, Arizona. It's March 5th and 6th, so it's a very fun conference, so just saying. Don't forget the silent auction. Here are things that I knitted for the silent auction for you guys. So I want you guys to go bid. I want like $100 bids on some of these items, okay? So, and here's your code for this. This is the code. I'm putting things for both of my, it's got stuff that I do when I do workshops with parents, but I added a lot of new stuff just for this one. And so, it will have a lot of the things that you need. So we actually have 6 minutes for questions. I rarely do that.
Will you stay there, and then I'll move around with the mic?
That sounds perfect.
Okay, great. I see you back there. I'm coming for you. So here we go. We'll start with this, and we'll see what we can do in 6 minutes.
Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, very helpful. So I have a daughter who is 12 years old, fully included. We work with Kate Ahern, a friend of yours.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she's pro crow to go, with her all day. We're finding, though, as she's in middle school now, she's in 7th grade, as the academic content becomes more and more challenging, it's harder to really teach the concepts. It was much easier, we found, in elementary school, but as we move through middle school, and we're kind of really worried about high school. So I guess my question is, a couple of questions. Any thoughts on that? Secondary to that, any thoughts on reverse inclusion and things of that nature?
I missed the second part.
I'm sorry, reverse inclusion?
Oh, reverse inclusion.
Reverse inclusion.
Right.
And kind of universal design and things of that nature. So it's really a two-part question.
Right.
One is just any global thoughts on her moving through moving to the high school. We're in a very good school system. We're very blessed.
That's great.
Yeah, so... and I'm also curious because I'm on the school board and I'd like to help other students as well.
Okay. So the first question about, the pace gets faster and the content gets bigger and deeper as you go to high school, as you're in middle school and even more in high school. We've found that having peers try to help us decide what are I find that if you are in an inclusive situation, it's easier because we have peers help us try to decide, and the teacher, like, what are the key things you really want? What are the key takeaways? What are the big ideas that you want my student to really get? We're not going to be able to do every vocabulary word for every unit. Can you pick 2 or 3 and tell me what's really important? So have the teacher help with that, and then the peers helping. Peers, one of the things that I have found that when we've done this, that the teachers are very happy if the peers are defining words, if they're using things like the bubble map or making books that talk about those key concepts, that they're learning it at a deeper level. And teachers are really happy about that. So trying to get, to narrow the focus so you say, I can't teach, you know, there are 80 vocabulary words that go with this 6 weeks unit. That's not going to happen. Let's pick, you know, 2 or 3 a week, and then let's use that descriptive methods teaching, and let's use, and let's try to create books that really, so we have deep knowledge supporting those kinds of ideas. I found that, that doing some background knowledge with videos has been really helpful for my students with Angelman syndrome, because they are very tuned in. I like the Watch, Know, Learn website. Is a free website that has videos that are done by teachers and are curated. Some are too complex, but some are really great. I spend a lot of time searching for videos, and I know that's, but it really helps. And to the second one, what about reverse inclusion? And that's what we're seeing happen a lot of, you know, so many of the students I'm working with are not in inclusive classrooms. They're in you know, self-contained classrooms, but doing reverse inclusion. You know, I prefer full inclusion, but when that isn't happening, reverse inclusion can be really, really powerful. I've done a lot with communication circles, where we set up a communication circle with 4 or 5 students each semester, where they learn the language. That's a topic for a different day, but where they learn the language of that communication system, and they model, and they have goals each week, and they're trying to provide support. But I think having the peers come in with not just some hangout goal, having really specific goal, like the types of things I talked about today. Let's create some books with Jessica to help her learn these words. Let's model those words on her device and then put them on this book. That the peers have clear goals, because otherwise they're just sort of hanging and don't really know what's expected. So, sorry, that was a little long. Anything else? Okay.
So, Caroline, can you define reverse inclusion? And then we have time for one more question.
So, reverse inclusion means that, at least this is my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I've always understood it is you're in a self-contained classroom and you bring gen ed peers of a similar age in to be there for a certain amount of time each day. The classrooms I'm working with who are doing that, the students are, the learning, the skills the students are developing are so much higher, because they've got somebody working one-to-one with them who's at their age, and they want to work hard for that student. It's a really, really very successful opportunity. Yes, and the last question.
Who's got it?
And if you guys want to take the time to take a break, it will not hurt my feelings. Oh, we have one more.
Here we go.
Hi, it was a great talk. Thank you very much. We have a young emerging AAC user. How quickly do you open up the language and kind of go off of vocab builder to give them more access to words like boss and the plane and the things that Kai was saying?
Well, so for example, with Kai, I see that she has some receptive language, that she knows a lot of the core words like want and get and more and not and go and do. She gets those words, she understands them. And so I encourage the family to open it up and let her explore and be modeling. But we're not really focusing on noun town. She just happened to find. We're really trying to focus on high frequency words, the action words that are high frequency, describing words, you know, hot and cold and big and little, those kinds of things. But if she's exploring and she finds it, then they have a conversation about it. So it's just a way that she can be building vocabulary. Because typically developing kids know 6,000 words by the time they hit first grade, okay? And so I want our students to have a rich vocabulary if that feels, if it doesn't seem overwhelming. And so I kind of see how that child is reacting, and she is hungry, not overwhelmed, and so I really want her to have access. In general, I really don't try to restrict a lot. I mean, you may not have everything, but I would completely agree with the speaker at 9 o'clock with Laura Beauchamp that more is more. That if we just have 8 words and now you learn more, and now I'm going to give you 16 buttons on your homepage, your motor plan is gone, and it's not like our students have fabulous motor plans to begin with. So I try to have as many symbols or as many cells on the homepage as they can see, and I feel like they'll be able to touch by the end of the year. Like with a year, because I see students with Angelman getting better with practice at accessing. I mean, I see Kai from August to October, just, oh my gosh, her motor skills just improve so much from doing it, right? So, yeah, so more is more in general. So, okay, go have a break.
Thank you very much. We're going to take a 5-minute break and then come back for the next part of the session, which is on literacy. Thank you, Caroline.
Yeah.
Part 2 of Caroline, Dr. Musselwhite.
Yes.
We're shifting from inclusion to literacy 101, what we can do as parents to help support our children, learning to be readers and writers and thinking of themselves as readers and writers. So with that, Y'all already know who Dr. Musselwhite is. I'm just going to turn it back to her, and we'll go from there.
Good. And will you just hand these out so people can see those as I talk? Yes. So just like they just go around everywhere. So you guys saw my information. Now, I thought this was a 55-minute session, and then I looked at the schedule when I got here. It's 45. Oh, my goodness. Put your seatbelts on. Okay, here we go. So this is a wonderful flow chart for conventional interventions. I'm going to be talking about emergent interventions today. So does your child know most of the letters most of the time? If no, that leads us down the emergent path. Do they actively engage during shared reading, meaning that they initiate with their communication device, making comments and asking questions and answering questions? Do they have a robust, full means of communication and interaction and understand that writing involves letters and words? And so I'm going to talk today primarily about emergent, interventions, but some of these strategies are going to be helpful for conventional students as well. So a lot of you have seen this literacy wheel, the idea that reading, writing, speaking, and listening are just intricately related. And I'm going to try to point out some of the ways that they are related. The big idea, more is more. I alluded to this in the last session, so if you were here, you heard it, that whether we have a high-tech system, so for example, Kai is using Words for Life with 84 symbols, or do we have a light tech system, such as a robust system such as POD? We want to make sure that whichever kind of system students are using, and by the way, I put this in your Dropbox. It's a link to lots of paper-based displays. So for example, here's one from TouchChat from Saltillo that has a core board plus lots and lots of language to use. So if you don't have a high-tech system yet, here's a robust light-tech system. And that's in your handout. So I'm going to say that for literacy, we need that strong language base. So it's really helpful if your student has a robust vocabulary and including the alphabet. So I'm going to talk first about shared reading. We're going to look at I'm going to try to hit most of the emergent supports that we would have for instruction. I'm going to talk about things that you can advocate for at school and also things you can do at home to empower your students. Because I know you don't have total control over what's happening at school. So I'm going to share with you what I hope will be happening at school, but knowing that if you're just frustrated that you can't make that happen, you can do this at home, okay? So repetition with variety and shared reading. Did you know that typically developing children from literate homes have heard their favorite stories read 200 to 400 times? Raise your hands if you believe that because you have personally read a story to your child. This is really important. So some of the research tells us that students who use AAC sometimes don't get a repeated reading of the same book 200 to 400 times. For multiple reasons, but one of the main reasons is that our students who with AAC devices sometimes can't ask for that, good night moon again, right? That they, and P.S. as parents, after the 57th time, we kind of try to talk them into a different book, like, oh no, we don't want to read, and children with good language skills just advocate for themselves. No, we will be reading Good Night Moon tonight again, and they insist, so we need to make sure we're doing that. And I'm going to also talk about wide reading, but right now I'm talking about repeated readings, the same story over and over. I love this research about the million-word gap. I think this is something to share with all families. Young children whose parents read to them 5 books a day enter kindergarten having heard 1.4 million more words than kids who are never read to. OMG, right? Really interesting study. Simple, predictable books for younger students. Brown bear, what do you hear? What do you see? I see a blue horse looking at me. Blue horse, what do you see? I see a yellow duck looking at me. So what we're changing on every page is the color and the animal. And so they're getting to hear those types of things. But there's also lots of powerful rhythm and some really good rhyming. Includes some color words. Look, me, what, you are all words that are included in that. So That's great if you have younger kids. If you have older students, you're going to need to find other books, and I'm going to pass this book around and then give it away at the end. This is a book that I wrote. Thank you, Vanna. So actually, let's just pass both of them around and let you take the cover off and throw the CD up on the table. So this is a book called Learning to Work, and it's about transition stories about, going to that your students are working, and it's got some predictable stories for older kids. I've also done things like raps. Wrote this book in 1983 or 93. So here's a book. Going to a party, just can't wait. Putting on deodorant, gonna look great. Okay, there's a predictable book for older students. That's the raps book, okay? Going to a party, just can't wait. Doing my makeup, gonna look great. I mean, is this like the perfect day to be doing that book? We better be doing all that stuff, right? So that's a predictable book for older kids. Here's another predictable book for older kids. Pizza Today. What should we get for the pizza today? How about pickles? No way. How about cheese? That's okay. And then we have that slot filler. So that's for my raps book. And by the way, because you guys are here, for the next 3 months, you could get any of my CDs for $5 instead of $35. So, but now I'm going to show you free ones. I don't want you to have to buy stuff, but I'm just saying if you liked that. So Tar Heel Readers, this amazing website. Raise your hands if you have not been, do not know about Tar Heel Reader. Oh, fresh meat. I love it. Okay, Tar Heel Reader is like one of the best sites on the planet. Tar Heel Reader has, I don't know, it's like maybe 80,000 books now that were written just for our students. It's, you can have voices. You can download them to a PowerPoint. They now made a connector to Pictello, so you can download it. Just Google this. Convert Tar Heel Reader to Pictello. I don't know what the website is, and I just Google it every time, and then I just fill in the URL for that Tar Heel Reader book, and now I can open it up in Pictello, and the child can have it on their device anytime. So lots of great books that are age respectful for older kids. Here are some of the authors that I like a lot on Tar Heel Reader. Read a Book is one of my personal favorites. He's so funny. Jane Farrell. I have a lot of books, and I have books I've written with students I work with, and also books I wrote for various projects. So raise your hands if you have not seen any of the webinars that Erin Sheldon, Maureen Nevers, and I did at angelman.org. We did 43 free webinars on literacy and AAC. And so I wrote books to go along with most of those units, a lot of the units. So see if you can find a core word. This is just a screenshot of a few of my books. See if you can find a high frequency, really high frequency word you think you might see repeated multiple times in a book. What's a word? Look up here, look at the titles, and tell me a core word you think you could model using one of my books. Don't. Go. There. Like. Where. Can. Stop. That. Who. Right? So who can is just a really funny story about who can sing, she can, who can dance, he can, who can, and at the end you have women doing a can. So just, trying to make it a little edgy, a little fun for older students. So really fun ones. So when I'm doing shared reading, one of the things we really focus on is giving opinions. That is such an important life thing. It's a social thing. How many of you would say that your students are really pretty darn social? Right? It's a huge strength. So giving opinions plays into their strengths. If you can teach your students to give opinions. So here's a light tech board that I put in your Dropbox in case you don't have a rich system for right now. And you can see, so what are some positive comments up here? That whole top row, I like that, thumbs up, awesome, great. Now you could change that out. I mean, I have one student who wasn't using the comments on her device until her peers got in and they decided, let me put in some words. They asked her, hey, can we put epic on there? And she's like, yeah. And they put epic and then they're modeling. When they're watching a video, they're modeling epic, or they have somebody who, who comes in wearing a really cool new haircut, epic. And she started using it because it was the language of her peers. So making sure we customize, right? So the opinion and feelings page give us lots of ways to comment. So we're reading Journey to the Center of the Earth, but now our water is gone. We must find water soon. So here are things I would be modeling. This doesn't just happen. You've got to spend time modeling this. Uh-oh, no, not good. Help, drink, yikes, thirsty. Those are lots of things you could model to talk about that page in that book, okay? I love this book. If you have a child who's in a wheelchair, you've got to read Wheeling by Read a Book. But notice the little sign. This is a caution. You've got to go in and say you want to. You can read all the books, not even the restricted books. So if you have teenagers, they're going to love that one. In fact, I wasn't thinking I'd have time, but we're just going to make time because it's a really great book. So, Consulting Over Student Stories, Wheeling. Oh, seriously. Do you see Wheeling? Oh, I know, it's under PowerPoints. There it is. Okay, so here's Wheeling. I want you to make a positive comment or a negative comment. Wheeling by Read a Book. Read a Book is David Copenhaver. That's his pen name. Wheeling speed. Wheeling read. Uh-oh, I think Wheeling peed. Right? That's why it's C for caution. And so think about, raise your hand if your student would like this book. Because it is, right? It's funny. And so we can go, uh-oh, or look out, or Wheeling swing, king, dingling, tennis, Venice, menace, fight, kite, absolute delight. Like, cool, okay? So we pause and let you make comments. Goat, boat, or just model them. Wheeling prayer, Wheeling stare. I have a lot of students who love making comments about that. Look out, uh-oh. Wheeling shop, stop, pop, dance, pants, balance, flowers, shower. I don't go fast like this with kids. I just want you to see. Wheeling scoops, maybe Wheeling pumpkin poops. Did we just suck your kids in again? They were kind of ignoring, and now we talked about pumpkin poops. We got them, right? Wheeling here, Wheeling there, Wheeling almost everywhere. Who would dare, being fair, think we're confined to a wheelchair? When I showed this, one of my students who's using a communication device in a wheelchair said, me, go. Like she wanted to go there. She wants to do this. I told her mom she hasn't signed her up for lessons yet. But this is the kind of book that's really fun for commenting. So that's your homework assignment. So I've talked about repeated books. We read the same book multiple times for different purposes. Maybe we're reading it to comment. Maybe we're reading to put in some high-frequency words, etc. But we also want to support their vocabulary. Because remember, 6,000 by 6, that's what we'd like to have, that our students understand 6,000 words by age 6. And if your students are older, we're still working on that. So we can help students grow their vocabulary by wide reading. Key issue for our students who aren't speaking and aren't reading independently, because research shows that one of the key ways students learn new words is through reading. And so if our students who are avid readers in high school are the ones who have a better vocabulary when they graduate. So the words like they roared their terrible roars, they gnashed their terrible teeth. That's the kind of thing that we can talk about. What does it mean to roar? A lion roars, you know. He doesn't look like a lion, but he's roaring too. They gnash their teeth. You know what that means? It goes, ooh, that was scary, right? So to summarize shared reading, we want to do wide reading. Lots of different books, because that builds vocabulary. It helps build world knowledge, which our students need. But repeated reading that same book many times builds print awareness. It helps them use language to retell it. It helps them take ownership. So that's what we see happening with typically developing kids. When we read that book 200 times, by the 200th time, they're starting to take over parts of that book, okay? I talked about Strive for 5 in the last session. Pick a book and pick 5 words that you want to model in that book and put a Post-it on the book so you can just look at it. And yes, I did change this one. In case you're looking at the handout, it's different. I changed things this morning. Think core, only one noun. So let's say you're reading Goldilocks and the Three Bears. It's not about bears and chairs. Don't be spending time looking for bears and looking for chairs, because those aren't words you need as often. Here are some words you might be modeling. She, like, eat, not like, finish, good, right? Those are the kinds of words that are all-day words that she eats that porridge and she says good, or she says not like. Those are the words we're modeling. We're not modeling porridge. We're not trying to find, oatmeal or something to substitute for porridge. We're hitting the high spots, words that are all-day words, not words that are just this book words, okay? So that was shared reading. Now let's look at self-directed reading, students reading and enjoying. And what I'm going to do is talk about some of our students don't really love books, and we find that when they're books about them, they're much more likely to love them. Or books about people they love, they're much more likely to love it. So the first one is going to be a 5-sentence story, something your child cares about. Write 5 sentences and turn it into a book. It might be light tech. You might use an app like Pictello or Kid in Story. You might put it on Tar Heel Reader. Here's Pictello, which I love for all these reasons. I can use pictures and videos, etc. One of my absolute favorite apps. Here's Lily Grate's Surf Day. I went to Malibu. I put on my wetsuit. I picked my surfboard. I surfed the big waves. I got a trophy. Do you see how some of these transitions are bold? They stayed in this one. I don't know why. That you can really see when it changes. I got a trophy. I was wiped out. And there's that humor at the end. I love stories with humor at the end because we're more likely to have people read it again and again and again because of the humor. Think about also her peers who laugh because they love that, that you wipe out when you surf. And so they get that and they're laughing at the book because it's that double entendre. So things like that can make it really powerful. So to summarize, it's great for engagement because it's personally meaningful. It used that black background and yellow letters, so the words pop. But it's great for independent reading because it's accessible. We can have language added to read it to her, and it's personal, so she's going to want to read it over and over and over. Here's Lucas. Lucas lives in Europe, and this is his first snow. So we set this one up as a book, but also a social script. So he's sharing this with a friend and then having it as a social interaction. Guess what I got to do last weekend? I'll give you hints. It was outside, it was fun, and it was cold. And the person's making guesses, and then he tells you the next part. I went skiing with my family. And maybe they guessed skiing, and maybe they didn't. Did you ever get to go skiing? We're turning it over. We're doing a turnover, so your friend is talking to you about this book. My dad and I played in the snow. Do you like to play with your dad? It was carnival. I got to dress up like the Hulk. Who's your favorite character? An open-ended. My friend dressed up like Princess Sophia. Do you like princesses? I mean, I would say no, I don't. But how many kids love princesses? So that really interested them. Well, that's all. It was a fun day. Later, dude. So it's great, again, for engagement because it's personally meaningful. Same thing. I just cut and pasted that from Lily Grace's. Same thing. But his is different because it's good for independent reading, but also good for shared reading because it has those turn-takings. So it's good for a partner to read it with somebody. He can read it with his family. He can read it with his friends. Every time there's a turnover, they're encouraged to jump in, right? It's great for independent reading, again, accessible, etc. I just love this. So Isabel, who might be watching out there, Edito's mom is Isabel, and she lives in Guatemala. She's here. Oh, good. Okay. Well, she wrote this. She came to AAC in the desert, and she was talking about how her son didn't really love books very much, and we gave a lot of ideas of how to make books, personally meaningful, how to make them more, more laminated and or durable paper, etc. And she wrote this to me, and I made this into a quote on my Pinterest page of AAC and literacy quotes. Life is short, and in the end, it's not about who has the nicest, untouched, most perfect books, but who has explored the most, enjoyed the most, and learned the most, and advanced in emergent literacy. So your homework is to do a 5-sentence story, okay? Let's jump to independent writing with the alphabet. So these are pictures taken from the Angelman Camp in Ontario, and you can see lots of students getting to explore the alphabet in different ways. And for some of them, it might have been the first time they really got to access the alphabet. And guys, it's important to know it's okay to scribble. Like, we forget this when kids are older. We think they have to do it right. No, they don't. If they're starting to learn the alphabet, they get to scribble, and they get to scribble for a long time. How many years do typically developing kids get to scribble? They get to scribble for years. They start when they're about 1, and nobody expects them to write anything that's meaningful until they're at least 5. They get 4 years if people allow them to just scribble with feedback, though. So if this little girl hadn't drawn on her baby sister, if this had been on a piece of paper, Mama might be saying something like, "Oh, you made a Y." You know what? Y is for yellow, and you love yellow. The Y is for yellow. You know, the sun is yellow. So done, boom, little bit of informative feedback, and we're done. You made a Y, here's what it could stand for. That's the kind of thing we do naturally for kids who are young and scribbling. Older students who are playing around with their alternative pencils, people think it should spell something and they kind of try to shut it down. No, scribble's great. We just need to give informative feedback. And we need to know what they're writing about so we can do a better job of informative feedback. So I have a Pinterest page for accessing the alphabet. I use a lot of alphabet boards. I put these in your Dropbox. So this is the QWERTY board, and of course uppercase on the back, lowercase on the front, and this one is in ABC writing order. This would be the one I would try first, because that's what we hope your students are going to be using eventually, is a keyboard. If that's not working, then you might try a flip book. So an alphabet flip book, where if you're trying to find the letter to write the word hi, I could be saying, let's see, it's not on this page, I need to turn the page, looking for the letters to, I was using this class. Looking for the letters to spell hi. It's one of these. Thank you. It's one of these letters. E, no. F, no. G, no. H, yes. Let's try it. H, hi. Yes, let's write an H for high. So if I'm modeling, that's what I could do. Lots of modeling, or students can just pick a letter. You know, when we did Alphabet Action Man, they might have picked D, and then we did let's dance, dance, dance for D, okay? So that's the alternative pencil print flip chart. Now, I did something called the writing pyramid about 10 years ago. And we really eventually want students to be using the alphabet, but we also want them to be using what I call core plus content. So core is all those high frequency words: can, get, do, not, want. And content would be your categories like clothing and food and animals. And then word banks means I gave you some symbols and you're going to put them together to write something. I try to limit word banks because you don't own that language. It's going to go away. And I learned this about 35 years ago. We were doing an activity where we had some words and we were writing Valentines to cartoon characters, and I had the words pretty, silly, ugly. And the student loved the word ugly and thought it was hysterical, and he wanted ugly in his Valentine for Goofy, right? He just thought it was so funny. Next day he comes to school and he's eye pointing and he's going, and what he wants is the choice board that had been, we'd had the word ugly on. It's hanging up on the wall and there's no symbol on it. And he's going, and luckily one of the aides figured out, she's like, oh, I think you want the word ugly. Is that what you want? And he's like, so excited. You know, sorry, buddy, you don't own ugly. You just got to rent it for the 15 minutes we did that activity. So when you bring in symbols for an activity that's temporary, that's not being as helpful, because they can't. He wanted ugly and he didn't own it. That was the day I realized we really have to have kids have a rich vocabulary. And if he found ugly on his device, then I can show him how to get back there, right? So let's just look at this with Sadie. So Sadie was in first grade when this story happened. They did a journal across a year. And so it was in first grade, fully included, using Proloquo to go. She used the Light Tech alphabet, this one, the QWERTY, and she also used the alphabet on her Proloquo app. So here she is in September. That's the first time they did it. So the idea is at the end of every month, they're going to draw a picture and they're going to write about it. Sadie isn't good at drawing, so she can't draw anything representational. So her aide drew a stick figure of a girl and the sun. And then her aide wrote, "This is me in September," and her aide wrote Sadie and September. And so what Sadie was doing was making marks, and you can see she has some circles, and she has some lines. And so where is she on the writing pyramid? Is she writing with the alphabet? Not yet. Is she using her communication device to write? Not yet. Is she using word banks? No. Okay, so let's look at November. The gap between Sadie and her peers is getting wider because you know that by November, her peers are writing some letters that mean something based on the picture they drew. Sadie's not able to make a picture, so we don't have context to guess. So I could say, "Oh, Sadie, you made an X, and I wonder if that stands for xylophone." I mean, I have no idea what it could stand for because I don't know what she's writing about, right? She doesn't have a topic. I can't say, "You made an O, and that stands for Oscar the Grouch," because there's no picture. I don't have any context, and I'm not sure that she's making letters. Let's see what happened. I went there in December and did a training for her team. So let's look at how it looks different in January. So her mom sent in some photos that were personally meaningful, and Sadie picked a picture. So now we have some context. And she chose these words on her communication device. Who you play with, who, dad, who you play, page. And so they took a screenshot of the message window and printed it, and then she pasted it on. Really great. So now she's writing, and where is she now? Is she writing with the alphabet? Not yet. Is she writing using her device? Absolutely. So she's on here. So they sent it to me and said, "How would you change it?" And I said, "I'd do two things. For one, I would take the symbols off the message window because communication, symbols are for communication. I wouldn't, take the symbols off her device for communicating. Symbols are for communication, text is for literacy. I want her to see text, even if somebody else has to read it to her. I want her to understand that what she wrote can be read, that it's meaningful. So let's look and see what they did. First of all, let's see where she is. She's exploring her writing tools. She's using symbolic language to generate print. She is selecting a symbol to make a comment. So she's already over here on this adapted bridge, which is in your Dropbox, okay? Let's look at her in February. The second thing I said, so the first thing I said is take the symbols off the message window, not off the communication part, but just off the message window. And always model, when you're modeling, always model that she can also write with the alphabet. And so this time she wrote, "What you do, Auntie Pam, pizza cook." That looks really yummy was a single message, one button. I like this. And then she went to her, they said, "Oh, would you like to write with your alphabet?" And she typed a B, and they said, "Sadie, you wrote a B, and I wonder if that B was for baking because you and your aunt were baking pizza." And Sadie's like, "Sure." Now, was it intentional? It doesn't matter. We just connected it to B is for bake, okay? The next month, this is what she picked, and she chose to go to the alphabet. My feeling is that probably she's noticing her friends are writing with the alphabet, and she wants to be like her friend. And she wrote MMNPPIUGDD. And her para said, or her speech therapist was talking with her and said, "Sadie, you have a lot of M's, and I wonder," and Sadie just took her finger and pointed to the picture of her mother. Okay, that means she's definitely intentional. She's definitely writing an M for a reason. And she said, "Great, can you show me anything else? I see some P's." And she just paused, and Sadie touched the picture of Paige. "And I see D's," and she touched the picture of Dad, right? So she's starting to become conventional. That's faster than a lot of students we work with, and they were doing lots of other things that I'm going to show in the next part, but she's really, really growing, and she's moving forward on her device. Because, guys, it's okay to scribble, remember? But give informative feedback. Give informative feedback. It's very important. When you're scribbling with the alphabet, we need to have a context. We need to know what you're writing about, and then I can give you ideas of what it might mean. The last area is alphabet and phonological awareness. There's a screenshot that just shows a lot of alphabet books. I did a tip about that at AAC Intervention. I did a tip about don't do letter of the week, and then I did a tip about how alphabet books can be really great for older students. And so like there's one that I love. There's the Frozen alphabet some of your kids would like. But there's a wonderful one, the ABCs of fashion. A is for accessories. B, I don't think I have that. No, I don't. A is for accessories. B is for boardwalk. No, B is for, I don't remember. And C is for catwalk, right? So just really fun thinking about what are your students interested in. If it's the ABC, if it's trains, make an ABC book about trains or go look for one on Tar Heel Reader. One of the things you should do is 1 to 2 minute models, not long, like literally, definitely no more than 2 minutes, using whatever alternative pencil your child or your student is using. So you could do things like you're thinking out loud. You want to just make a list. So put one item on a list, right? So we're thinking about, oh my gosh, hey guys, I'm going to the grocery store. I need help. And you can have all of your students model using your child's alternative pencil. So if your child is using this QWERTY, then you have siblings modeling that they want to do, Mom, get pizza. And so they're usually like, okay, what letter do I need to write for pizza? And they're trying to find the P for pizza. And that then your student is going on their device and maybe they pick that they want, macaroni and cheese, and then you ask them to try to find the M for macaroni, so you can write that down. We're going to write a note for the door, like, oh, you know what, we need to make a note for the door. We need to tell people to be quiet. We need to tell people, shh, what letters do I need to write? Shh. A note for the door in school or home, a note to your grandparents, etc. You're writing a communication like, oh, we need to tell your teacher that we are going to be skiing and we're not going to be at school next week. Oh, maybe we shouldn't tell her about skiing, but we'll just say, I'm not going to be at school. I will be gone. What letter do I need to write? Gone, okay, etc. So let's think of some family games. I think find that letter. It's like that scavenger hunt I just did. So your student takes their alternative pencil and they find F, and everybody is running around the house trying to find something that starts with F and bringing it back, so an actual object or a picture of an object. And so then you take pictures of those, and that's where you add to that alphabet book, that personal alphabet book. Alphabet Action Man that I showed earlier, where you're saying, find the letter M, and now we're going to march, march, march for M, etc. Family games, whose name is it? We pick a letter, and we try to think who has that letter in their name, and we write down the names, and we try to find that letter in names of people they care about. I just find that many of the students I work with who have Angelman syndrome really care about other people, and names are really engaging to them, people's names they care about, and so this is a fun thing to do. Again, make a book. Another one that I have found really fun, my grandkids just adore Hangman, and so whenever we go out to eat, we try to find places that have paper tablecloths so we can write on the tablecloth and play Hangman. You don't have to know the alphabet to play Hangman. So we have a message, and you're guessing the letter G, and I'm like, okay, let's see. No, I do not have a G. There is no G. And so you make a G, and you X it out. You put it in the little box, and you X it out, and you're like, you got to add an I on your head. No, because guess what? You guessed the letter G. I'm going to turn the page. I'm going to turn the page. E, F, G, no G. So whatever they're doing, you're just having them guess a letter, and you're talking about that letter. And then if you write the letter in, you write it into the right place in the Hangman, and then you say, oh, yes, look, here's a G. There are two of them. G, G. Here's another G. You did a good one. You guessed G. Tongue twisters. This is like, it's Christmas. Ask everybody in your family for Christmas to make up a tongue twister about themselves and take a picture and make a tongue twister page. And then you're going to make a tongue twister book for your child, right? And so we have this, and if your child is fully included, please ask the peers to do this. So Jillian jumped into a jiggling jar of jam. I mean, they're just really silly. Whose student would like, who has a child that would love those silly, silly, silly things, right? And then put those on a Big Mac. Oh, by the way, I happen to have talking bricks. These would be great for putting tongue twisters on. It'd be great for doing, my letter is D, when we're coming up with that. We put a Post-it on it. So I have talking bricks. This talking brick is going to the person whose birthday is closest to Christmas without going over, because you rarely get good presents. So who has a birthday after December 15th? Okay, what's your birthday? 22nd? 22nd, honey, you're a winner, winner, chicken dinner. Okay. That's from AbleNet, and we had their catalogs passed around. The last thing I'm going to talk about is that you need to advocate in school for a comprehensive literacy curriculum. There are a few of them. Meville to Weeville is one. I'm going to show a couple that I like a lot. Reading Avenue is new from Boardmaker, and if you own Boardmaker online, you can get this for free. If your student is 9 or under, this is a great curriculum for them. Developed in consultation with Dr. Karen Erickson, who's at the Center for Literacy and Disability Studies. It gives 3 years of instruction, about 1,000 hours for beginning readers. Little more than just following lesson guides. It's really helpful to deliver evidence-based practice. And the books are, a lot of them were written by Maureen Donnelly, and she's really clever, and so there's a lot of pretty fun books in there. Some of them she didn't write, but the ones she wrote are very fun. If they're 10 and up, I really like Readtopia. It was developed in consultation with Dr. Karen Erickson, with me, and with Jerry Stemich. And I was passing around the graphic novel that goes with, for example, I think I was passing around Journey to the Center of the Earth. So did everybody get to see the graphic novel? So that just showed the 7 levels. I think 6 of the 7 levels. So you can see it went from very emergent to early conventional. This is based on literature, so like Treasure Island or Anne of Green Gables, etc. And so it has activities for science, life skills, social studies, math, and English language arts, but it's all based on literature with those 6 levels of graphic novels. And then there's all these types of informational text, and there's 4 levels for each one, so this goes from emergent to conventional, and lots of amazing videos. Oh my gosh, I just love the videos. And then phonics activities ranging from alphabet instruction, if your student doesn't know the alphabet, there's some really great alphabet instruction, to making words if your student knows the letters but doesn't really know how to use them to write words and read words, and then up to a more sophisticated word study. So these are some of the units with that one. Don't forget about AC in the Desert. Don't forget the silent auction. I knitted about 35 things that are going to be out there. Please bid. And here's the URL for this one. And look, I even have time left. At least it said I do.
So we have about 7 minutes for questions. Anybody with a question?
Actually 6, because they wanted it to be over at 12:45, and I don't want to keep people from lunch.
Okay, 6 minutes for questions.
I mean, I can stay later. I just don't want you all to miss your lunch.
Great. I'm coming.
How much receptive language are kids getting from passive screen time? Let's say they're watching a movie.
I think very minimal.
Very minimal.
Yeah. Passive screen time. I think it's. Everybody's different, but I do not feel like that's really supporting literacy much.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Interactive screen time is very different. Okay. And we can make videos that support learning. So, for example, I might make a video that says, wow, Sadie, you wrote P, and P was for page, and then I'm underlining and doing arrows, and it's personally meaningful, but just general screen time doesn't thrill me.
Are there just not enough channels coming from the screen to the kid and not enough interaction?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's about the interaction and about very personally meaningful, and then it's thoughtfully presented and planning to teach you language or literacy skills. So I just, you know, and I'm not saying kids never learn anything from it. Of course they do. There's incidental learning. But we do know that students who have more significant disabilities are not as good at incidental learning. And so, yeah, I worry about it. Yeah, next question.
I have a question back here,
Okay.
exactly where you cannot see us.
Yes, okay.
So my daughter has the Novo Chat, and I see you with the Pictello. I hadn't heard of it before, but would you recommend to have it like create those digital books separately, or if the app has the function to create books within it?
If you have a function that you can create books that
Can you use the mic, please, Caroline? They can't hear you on the live stream. Can you use the mic, please?
Sorry.
Thank you.
So the question was, if you have an app, so she has NovaChat, that really supports creating books that can be read, that can have oral reading of the book. Could you do that instead of having a separate app? Absolutely. If it works well within your app, and then they have it with them all the time. So, you know, I see students who have some of their books on their app and some of their books on a separate iPad with an app for social interaction, because then you can. The reason that I sometimes like it on a separate one is that then you can talk about the book. You can read the book and talk about it with somebody at the same time. So you're not having to go back and forth from your language for interacting to your book. And so, you know, just think about that when you're making the books.
Thank you.
What's the purpose of this book? If it's for self-directed, they're not using their language to talk. They're just listening to the book. But if it's for having a conversation, then I like to have it on a separate one. Next.
Next question.
These are really great questions, by the way.
I'm coming.
I just have a question for emergent readers who are device users in terms of whether there's been anything studied about what's more effective for our AAC users reading, whether it's using like a finger or a hand to actually point to the text to read along, or whether it's using their device to fill in a word, in a repetitive text or something like that.
So I don't think we have great research telling us yet, and so I'm going to be going with my gut. I find that repetition with variety, so that sometimes we're reading a book and we're filling in one word, but we're not trying to get you to read, I like that cat. We don't want to do that type of thing. We might be modeling some retelling, but we're not just filling in individual words. I have found that the strategy that's been the most effective for me, and I didn't put it in here, but I do story retelling using core language, where I've read a page in a book, and then I retell that using the student's device. And I put a tip for that. I didn't put it in your Dropbox, but I will when I remember, or somebody will remind me, Karen. I have found that my students start using the words that I model in conversation or when we're reading books, and that reading books is a great way for me to just talk about it. Oh, she is mad. Oh, she wants more. Oh, she is, so as I'm reading about Goldilocks, like, she is so hungry. Ah, she's not happy. Oh, look, did you see that? That I'm modeling words and just retelling that story, and I'm not trying to write, the chair broke. That's not the point of it. The point is just, having a conversation about this book. And that's the thing that I have found to be the most successful in helping kids to use their devices. But now, if the goal is print processing, then I love having them doing pointing. So sort of, what is the goal? And I also love this from the dollar store, that I can highlight some words on their device and put this over there. Whether it's letters or words, I can highlight some words using this little wand from the dollar store. So I will just leave this up here on this table, and whoever gets there first can have it. Oh, well. Or on the floor.
So that's all the time that we have today. Thank you so much, Caroline.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
And make sure to check out the Dropbox page that's up here. Can we put that back up on the screen one last time if you haven't caught a snapshot of it? And remember to also, if you're interested in getting the What's the app you're giving away?
Oh, Total Talk.
Total Talk.
Yeah, I need it in 5 minutes.
In
so
the next
50
5
words or
minutes,
less.
50 words or less about why you want that app, and it'd be good for your kid with your name and email address so you can actually get the code. Do that, hand it in, and we'll get there.
And I am giving away one of those books that's going around, the Learn to Work book. I'm going to give that away to the person whose birthday is closest to today without going over. Who had a birthday like in November or already in December? Raise your hands if you had a birthday already in December. How about November? No, we have a December right here, December 1st. December 1st.
Okay, you're it, Tim.
Is this a book that will be appropriate for you, that Learn to Work? Would that be helpful for you guys? Okay, we'll find it for you, and here's the CD that goes with it. Thanks,
Okay.
guys.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody.
Party.